Angel Ormston was born in 1975 in Mentor-on-the-Lake, a quiet suburb of Ohio, USA. This area has about 7,000 residents, and everyone knows each other. Children from local families often get along and grow up together. Life here is very simple and similar. The local high school serves as the main place of learning for most young people in town. Angel is a friendly and cheerful girl. She particularly enjoys walking around the area with her friends and often drives around with loud music. Local teenagers often gathered at a large shopping mall in a nearby, bigger city, which featured restaurants, a movie theater, and various stores. It made sense that Angel would find a part-time job there. In the summer of 1992, she started working at a fast food restaurant as she prepared for her senior year of high school. This job not only allowed her to earn some pocket money but also helped her save up for college. Her daily routine was consistent. She worked in the mornings and spent time with friends afterward. On the evening of July 31, 1992, 17-year-old Angel planned to go to her restaurant to pick up her paycheck and do some shopping. She promised her mother, Jackie, she would be home before the mall closed. Initially, her mother was not concerned and went to bed, assuming she was out with friends. The next morning, she woke up to find Angel missing from her room. Despite this, she didn't worry too much because it was common for her daughter to stay over at friends' houses, especially on weekends and holidays, so she pushed her uneasy thoughts aside. In this close-knit community, crime was rare, and young people often visited each other without worry. However, Angel, a high school student, didn't always keep her mother informed, which led to concerns. Her mother didn't want to restrict Angel too much, allowing her daughter considerable freedom that matched her independent spirit. Angel's upbringing was relaxed. Her mother was adaptable and aimed to maintain a harmonious environment. Meanwhile, her father was often away as a long-distance truck driver. Despite the lack of strict rules or curfews in the Angel household, unsettling thoughts began to creep into Jackie's mind. Angel was missing all Saturday, and when her mother woke up on Sunday to find she still hadn't returned home, worries began to set in. She called families where Angel could stay, and her brother also went to the shopping center where she worked. Upon arriving at the parking lot, Angel's brother noticed her Honda Civic, which heightened his concern. He hoped to find Angel inside but instead found her purse, comb, and other personal items left on the driver's seat, indicating she might have vanished. He checked the burger joint where she worked but learned she hadn't shown up for a couple of days. Alarmed, he contacted Jackie, their mother, who hurried to the shopping center to retrieve Angel's car and uncover the truth while pushing aside her fears. Initially, she hoped it was just a series of coincidences. Angel often went out at night with her best friend, Stacy. That day, Stacy's family could not be reached, which gave Jackie some peace of mind. Nonetheless, anxiety grew as Jackie drove around the mall looking for Angel, but she found no trace of her daughter. Friends who did manage to contact her hadn't seen Angel since Friday. By 8 p.m., Jackie still couldn't reach Angel, deepening her worry. Jackie finally decided to report her daughter Angel as missing by going to the police. Although Angel was last seen on July 31st, Jackie did not visit the station until August 2nd. This delay raised suspicions among the police, but Jackie explained that she believed she needed to wait 48 hours before reporting someone missing. Jackie provided detailed information about Angel, including her life and relationships. Jackie asserted that, up until the very last moment, she was not worried that anything serious had happened to Angel. On the morning of Monday, August 2nd, Jackie managed to reach Stacy, who confirmed Jackie's fears. Stacy had spent the entire weekend at her sister's house and hadn't seen Angel. She was shocked to learn that her friend had been missing for over 2 days. Stacy tried to contact some mutual friends, but none had seen Angel. Following this, Jackie provided the police with new information, prompting them to initiate an active search for Angel. The police first examined Angel's car, which showed no signs of a struggle. The car was in normal condition, with no blood, signs of theft, or forced entry. The officers believed Angel may have left the car willingly. Given her age, they suggested she could have run away, but Jackie rejected this idea, citing their good relationship. Angel was not involved with banned substances and had always remained calm during her teenage years. Despite her independent nature, she was not the type to run away. In fact, she had been making future plans, including furthering her education at university. Detectives worked extensively to investigate Angel's disappearance. They suspected she might have been kidnapped from the car and collected many fingerprints at the scene. Although there were numerous prints, all belonged to family and close friends. Despite this, every individual had to be investigated to clear them as suspects since there were no other leads. The investigation began with Angel's father, a truck driver, but he was quickly ruled out because he had a verified alibi. He was in another state when his daughter went missing. Next, detectives looked into Angel's mother, Jackie. Her refusal to take a polygraph test raised significant suspicion and drew the attention of the investigators. They noted her delay in contacting the police and her decision to take Angel's car from the parking lot soon after learning about the disappearance, which further fueled suspicions. The police lacked the authority to compel her to take a polygraph test, and there was no direct evidence against her. As a result, the investigation continued with Jackie being the primary suspect. Jackie claimed that on the evening when Angel left home, she intended to go to a burger place. However, interviews with local staff revealed that Angel never arrived to pick up her paycheck that day. Investigators seized the opportunity to gather more information from Angel's colleagues. They quickly eliminated Jackie from the list of suspects due to Angel's good relationship with her family. However, they developed several other theories, including a suspicious connection to a former manager known for inappropriate behavior toward female employees. Investigators suspected that the former manager had been spying on female staff while they changed into their work uniforms. Later, he was fired for a harassment incident. Several female employees reported that this manager had touched them inappropriately. When the police investigated him, they discovered he had a criminal record for inappropriate behavior with minors, making him the main suspect. Other women also mentioned that he frequently focused on Angel, often looking for chances to be alone with her in the kitchen and making inappropriate comments. When this was discovered, the detectives were so focused on the case that they overlooked Jackie. The former manager was quickly located and interviewed, but he denied any involvement in Angel's disappearance. He said that she hasn't seen him since they worked together. He claimed that, on the day she went missing, he was far from his hometown and provided a timesheet showing that he was at another location of the fast food chain that day. Despite this evidence, detectives did not exclude him as a suspect and continued to question everyone at the restaurant, including both staff and management. Through their investigation, they uncovered a secret that Angel had kept from her family. She had been fired for consistently being late. While she was indeed heading to the restaurant to collect her final paycheck, this revelation did not provide any new leads regarding her disappearance. Gradually, all of Angel's co-workers were ruled out as suspects because they had alibis. Neither Angel's former manager nor her mother was considered a viable suspect in the case, making it difficult for the police to conduct their investigation. Communication with Angel's closest friends did not reveal any new information. Everyone was shocked at the idea that someone in her circle might wish her harm. She was gentle, trusting, and usually avoided conflict. However, her trusting nature made her vulnerable to someone who might manipulate her into a dangerous situation. After a long period without contact, fears grew that Angel had died. She hadn't reached out to anyone, appeared in public, or used any payment methods. Given these circumstances, the police decided to re-examine the people closest to her, as those responsible for such crimes are often found among acquaintances. The focus shifted to her best friend, Stacy. Although they had spoken to her briefly before, this time the interview lasted over 4 hours. From the start, Stacy expressed a strong willingness to help but firmly denied any involvement. She was cleared as a suspect when she provided a confirmed alibi. She had spent the entire weekend at her sister's house and they had been together the whole time, cooking side by side. The police are trying to ask Stacy if she knows about Angel's relationship with a man. Stacy revealed that Angel had recently become interested in a young man named Mark Sotka, a 19-year-old who had just graduated with honors from their high school. Stacy explained that Angel had been in love with Mark for a long time and even hoped to start a serious relationship with him. However, Angel was very private, especially about her relationships, and only Stacy knew about Mark, not even sharing it with her mother. During the questioning, Stacy reveals that Angel was aware of her pregnancy shortly before she disappeared. They had talked several times about the possibility of telling Mark about the baby, and Angel was optimistic that he would accept her and the child, viewing it as the start of their life together. Stacy was doubtful, but Angel was convinced she could build a family with Mark. The detectives decided to investigate Mark's background before confronting him. It appeared that Mark was not ready for fatherhood. Just before Angel went missing, he started college, which suggests he may have only considered Angel a short fling while planning to focus on his studies. They found no incriminating evidence against him, as he had a clean record and a solid reputation in school. Eventually, Mark was called to the police station for questioning. He was surprised to learn that he was considered a suspect in Angel's disappearance. He denied any involvement and refuted Stacy's claims about their relationship. When he learned that Angel might be pregnant, he laughed it off, dismissing it as a fabrication by his girlfriend. He admitted to having had a brief encounter with Angel at the beginning of summer but said they had not met again since then. Additionally, he had been in a relationship with another girl for 2 years. To support his claims, he needed to provide proof and a reliable alibi. Mark testified that he left work at 5 p.m. on July 31, 1992 to go to a shopping mall. He intended to buy a gift for his girlfriend and then meet friends at a pizzeria. The police began to investigate his account closely. His employment at a car dealership was verified through his timesheet, which matched his claimed working hours. Additionally, they found a receipt for the gift purchase. Several friends from work supported his story, confirming he was at the pizzeria until around 9 p.m. The only inconsistency was that some staff members at the places he visited that evening did not remember him. However, Mark willingly took a polygraph test, which showed no evidence of his involvement in any crime. As a result, he was cleared as a suspect. The investigation hit another dead end, prompting detectives to revisit earlier theories of escape or kidnapping. Discovering that Angel might have been pregnant reinforced these theories. Her family may have opposed her having a child at just 17, leading her to potentially run away to start a new life with the baby. Unfortunately, these possibilities did not bring them any closer to finding her. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Angel's mother decided to take action. She reached out to the community through local media in hopes of gathering information. Her appeal successfully raised awareness about Angel's disappearance, turning the incident into a well-known topic of discussion. Friends and concerned individuals joined in, distributing thousands of leaflets. Charities became involved, and a fund was established, raising $10,000 as a reward for anyone who could provide useful information for the investigation. In the following weeks, the police department received numerous requests for information, which opened several new leads for the investigation. Detectives conducted thorough checks, but these efforts did not yield any significant results. Frustrated, Angel's family made the decision to hire a private detective. When Angel's father returned from a trip, he was hopeful that it would help locate his daughter, unlike the ineffective efforts of the police. However, despite the detectives' hard work, no new information emerged. 3 months passed, and there were still no updates on Angel's case. By this time, her friends had almost lost hope, but her mother remained determined. Angel's mother, Jackie, even altered the message on their answering machine, leaving a note for her daughter in the hopes that she would eventually call. She refused to believe that anything bad had happened to Angel. Meanwhile, the entire city was critical of the police for their lack of progress, which led to increased pressure on law enforcement to revisit existing leads and suspects. Eventually, detectives began to focus on a man who was engaged to Angel's best friend. He was very interested in finding out what happened to her and was vocal in his criticism of the investigation. His name was Candle. Even though he showed a strong interest in Angel, he did not give any information to the detectives or the media. It was believed that he had attempted to start a relationship with Angel and was rejected, which might have led to her kidnapping or murder. On the day she went missing, he was working at a shoe store in the shopping mall where she was last seen. He had a confirmed alibi for that time, but after work, he could have committed a crime, especially since he was nearby. He allowed investigators to search his car, but nothing suspicious was found. The investigation had reached another dead end. On December 15, 1992, 4.5 months after Angel's disappearance, a local resident was out hunting with his dog. While walking through the forest, the dog became uneasy and led its owner away. This took them to a drainage ditch, where the hunter noticed something wrapped in a sheet and tied with a rope. Upon closer inspection, he saw a human hand protruding from the package. The man quickly contacted the police. When law enforcement arrived, they discovered a body in an advanced state of decomposition. Identification was possible only through dental records, which confirmed that it was 17-year-old Angel Ormston, who had been reported missing. On December 16, Angel's family was informed of her death. An autopsy showed she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, which might not have been fatal. However, she had sustained 2 stab wounds to the chest, both delivered with significant force, impacting her heart. As a result, she bled out quickly and died. Investigating her death was complicated by decomposition, but fibers resembling those from a blue carpet were found at the scene. The police compiled a list of all homes associated with Angel, including those of neighbors, family, and friends, in search of a home that might have green carpeting. One key location of interest was the house belonging to Mark, who might have been the father of Angel's unborn child. At the time of the murder, the house was empty as it was for sale. Witnesses claimed they saw Mark enter the house with a girl who matched Angel's description. Although the house had been sold by then, the new owners allowed detectives to inspect it. Most rooms had been renovated, except for the basement. Upon entering the basement, the police found a blue carpet that matched the fibers collected from the scene. Additionally, a clothesline similar to the one used by the killer to move the body was discovered in the laundry room, matching the one found on Angel. The new owners reported that both the carpet and the clothesline had been left behind by the previous owners. These items were sent for forensic analysis, and tests confirmed that the microscopic fibers and the rope matched those used in the crime. Furthermore, a bloody fingerprint was discovered in the basement. 5 months after Angel disappeared, on December 31, 1992, 19-year-old Mark Sotka was arrested on suspicion of murder. During his arrest, he insisted that the police had no evidence against him and claimed he was not the person they were looking for. He immediately refused to cooperate with detectives, prompting forensic experts to conduct a detailed examination of his car. They discovered that although he had attempted to clean the interior, a few small drops of blood remained. During questioning, Mark eventually broke down due to the overwhelming evidence against him. He admitted to committing an act he described as stupid. When pressed for more details, he confessed to murdering Angel. Mark explains that he invited Angel to his house for intimate relations again, but things changed that night when she revealed that she was pregnant and that he was the father. This news triggered a violent outburst from him. He demanded that she get an abortion, but she refused. An argument ensued, during which Angel threatened to cause problems. In a fit of rage, Mark struck her several times in the face. Angel fell in the garage, and Mark, grabbing a knife, returned to the basement and stabbed her twice in the chest. Afterward, he calmly met with his friends at a pizzeria, chatting and laughing as if nothing had happened. Later that evening, he wrapped her body in a sheet, secured it with a clothesline, and transported it in the trunk of his car to a wooded area, where he left it in a ditch. Afterward, Mark returned home, covered up the evidence of the crime, and cleaned his car. After 5 months of investigation, he was arrested as the killer. During questioning, Mark confessed to first-degree murder and led authorities to the location where he disposed of the knife used in the crime. Despite thorough searches, the knife was never found. However, he had limited chances of proving his innocence. The motive for the attack stemmed from Angel's pregnancy, which disrupted his future plans. Mark had no intention of continuing his relationship with her and wanted to focus on someone else. In February 1993, to avoid the death penalty that was in place at the time, Mark officially admitted his guilt. Consequently, he was sentenced to life in prison but became eligible for parole after 30 years. Angel's family pointed out that Mark showed no remorse or compassion, which explained how he was able to deceive the polygraph test. Following his sentencing, he was taken to jail. After serving 20 years, Mark utilized an old Ohio law that allowed him to request a parole hearing after 2/3 of his minimum sentence. His family was informed, and Angel's relatives increased their efforts to prevent him from being released. Their efforts were successful, and he was denied parole in July 2023. After serving 30 years, Mark appeared before the parole board again, but this time, Angel's family opposed his release once again. As a result, he remains in prison. Angel's family expressed their relief to the media, calling it a significant victory for them. Her mother stated that their family would continue to fight to keep the killer incarcerated and would never forgive Mark, who has never expressed remorse or sought forgiveness for taking Angel's life and the life of her baby. Jessica Edens was born on January 22, 1981, in a small suburb of New York State, USA. She came from a large family, with a sister named Diane and two half-brothers, Nathan and Adam. Jessica spent her early years surrounded by loving parents and siblings, with whom she developed warm relationships. She didn't have outstanding academic success but was always creative, dreaming of becoming a photographer. When her parents recognized this passion, they bought her an amateur camera, which she carried everywhere. She took pictures of people, nature, cities, and architecture, anything that caught her attention. Her work was admired and praised. During her teenage years, Jessica actively pursued this passion and mastered the craft. She began to shoot weddings and various events, initially for free, then for a small fee. This allowed her to earn enough money for her own needs, and the idea of building a real business became increasingly appealing. Jessica's personal life was also progressing. She was sociable, active, attractive, and always attracted a lot of attention. On November 19, 2007, she gave birth to a son named Hayden King. Jessica became pregnant during a rapidly developing relationship with a young man, but the love between them faded quickly, and they broke up before Hayden was born. However, Jessica remained optimistic and maintained friendly relations with the child's biological father, allowing him to communicate with Hayden. Jessica was determined to provide everything her child needed, regardless of whether she had a partner or was raising him as a single mother. Fortunately, she did not have to be alone for long. In 2008, Jessica met a man named Benjamin Edens. They quickly found common ground, grew closer, and within a few meetings, they could not imagine their lives without each other. They was in no hurry to officially register their marriage, as both were creative individuals who understood each other well. After a few months, they moved in together, and Jessica began to contemplate having more children. After a while, they officially got married in 2010. Shortly thereafter, they decided to move to a new large house located in a small, cozy town in Easley, South Carolina, which was ideal for a quiet family life. Their family relationships flourished, and Jessica was convinced she had found the man of her dreams, a feeling that was mutual. 2 years later, on July 19, 2012, they welcomed a daughter named Harper Edens. Jessica believes this further strengthens her relationship with Benjamin. He was a wonderful father who spent all his free time with Harper. He also became so close to Hayden that the boy did not suspect Benjamin was not his biological father. By 2017, Hayden was in the 4th grade, while his younger sister Harper was about to start 1st grade in the fall. This was an exciting milestone. From the outside, Jessica's family appeared perfect. She had 2 children, a beloved job, and a husband whom she described to everyone as the best person. Her eldest child was a good student, and the family expected the same from Harper. Jessica's passion for photography thrived, but when she had her daughter, she decided to take a break and become a housewife, stepping back from her small but successful photo business. However, as Harper grew more independent, Jessica returned to attending various events to conduct professional photography. To simplify her client search, she created a website where she introduced herself as a photographer from Greenville. Jessica described her life as perfect, But, as often happens, things were exaggerated. Behind the facade of love and understanding, difficulties began to arise in the marriage. Over time, Benjamin's feelings cooled, and tension accumulated between them. Jessica wanted to understand what was happening as she began to notice uncharacteristic behaviors in her husband. He would come home from work, immediately run into the shower without even saying hello to his wife and children, as if he were trying to hide something. More and more often, he stayed at work much longer than his shift lasted, citing overtime and global projects that no one could confirm. He began to actively engage in sports, carefully monitored his appearance, and switched to healthy eating. All this could look like ordinary healthy habits that people develop with age, but not with Jessica. She began to suspect Benjamin of cheating. Quickly, a suitable candidate for an affair appeared. A young, attractive woman had recently started at her husband's workplace. This woman's name was Meredith Rahm. She was born on October 29, 1988, in Collierville, Tennessee. In Jessica's opinion, it was on Meredith that her husband had set his eyes. In the early years of Meredith's life, her parents divorced, and her mother quickly found a new man and remarried, so Meredith had a stepfather named Carlton Chambers. He was a worthy person and became like a second father to her. The family in which she grew up was friendly and loving. Meredith had a younger sister named Brittany Rowell. She dedicated herself to her studies from an early age and was focused on career success. She studied well and was creative, like Jessica, but family and children were of little interest to her. In 2009, she graduated from the University of Memphis with a bachelor's degree in international business. After gaining some necessary experience, she moved to Greenville. Meredith was very independent and self-confident, which immediately caught Benjamin's eye. By the time they met, Meredith had started working at the same company as Benjamin. In fact, Jessica's suspicions were justified. Immediately after meeting Meredith, her husband became attracted to her. Their feelings come from both sides. They started dating in secret, and their affair continued for a year. Now, Benjamin finally realized that he wanted to be with his young mistress and wanted to break up with Jessica, but he didn't know how to approach the issue. He was afraid of offending his wife and wanted to avoid the difficulties of the divorce process. For a long time, Benjamin was torn between his family and his mistress. His wife's suspicions only aggravated the situation. The more accusations she made, the more inevitable the breakup felt, which provoked constant quarrels. Jessica did not trust her husband and wanted to find out what was going on. He tried to distance himself, but this could not go on forever. It was time to tell the truth, but Benjamin could not bring himself to do it. Instead of confessing, he decided to move out on far-fetched grounds, citing constant pressure from his wife. On April 11, 2017, Benjamin packed his things and moved from the shared family home to a rented apartment. At least that is what he initially told his wife. Jessica kept hoping that these were only temporary difficulties that many people experience, and that their marriage would be saved. She believed she could convince her husband to return to her and their children. Benjamin tried to avoid the topic of separation altogether, reluctantly answered calls and messages, which only offended her more. The betrayal was of such a magnitude that she could not forgive it. She was angry, and her hopes for a family reunion were shattered. But most of all, she was furious that Benjamin simply ignored her. As the persecution began, Jessica spread various damaging facts about Meredith on all social networks and on any sites where she could post information, exposing her as the homewrecker and her husband as a cheater. Jessica continued to communicate regularly with Benjamin, trying to win him back. Instead, he finally decided to file for divorce. Telling Jessica this provoked even more anger from her, and she now decided to annoy him as much as possible. She knew how much Benjamin loved their daughter Harper, so she sought sole custody of the girl. He had always been a caring father and loved the children, including Hayden. Therefore, he was against such a decision. Benjamin wanted to maintain the right to communicate with the children. He did not want to sit idly by. He hoped to smooth over the conflict and therefore proposed joint custody. Jessica was adamant. Against this backdrop, a serious custody battle began, and tensions escalated. Realizing that it would not be possible to agree amicably, Benjamin went to court on July 11th. He wanted to gain an advantage and testified under oath that Jessica was using the children as a weapon of revenge. By this point, Jessica had completely prevented meetings and communication between the children with their father, not even allowing contact through social networks and mobile phones. Everything was under her total control. Benjamin was afraid she could go too far. Simultaneously, Jessica intensified her harassment of Benjamin and Meredith. She continued to post not just hateful words toward Meredith on social media but also use graphic photos and other offensive captions. Previously, Jessica had tried to portray Benjamin's mistress as a family destroyer. Now, even more disturbing captions began to appear. She claimed that Meredith would get what she deserved, though she never specified what she meant. Meredith, the target of the harassment, began to fear that all of this could be dangerous. However, Benjamin insisted that Jessica had no history of violence, so he believed the situation would gradually settle down. He tried not to provoke her further, but it had little effect. The situation only worsened. When Jessica learned about the filing of a joint custody application by her husband, she was furious. Benjamin had always been a decent person, a valuable employee who earned a good salary and had no bad habits or addictions, so there were no serious grounds for denying him custody or terminating his contact with the children. He simply wanted to see them. Now that he had received the right to visit, which Jessica could not oppose. Due to the impossibility of taking revenge, she began to come up with more sophisticated ways to annoy him. Every short communication with Benjamin ended in conflicts and accusations. It was even more annoying to her that the mistress would be in contact with the children. During this period, Benjamin and Meredith regularly contacted the police to complain about Jessica's behavior. In particular, Meredith could no longer tolerate the publications that Jessica made about her daily on various social networks. She starts having problems at work when Jessica tries to turn things around her. Benjamin tried to prove that Jessica's behavior was stalking and very disturbing. Worse, he began receiving frightening messages from Jessica, all concerning the children. It seemed she was trying to intimidate him with ambiguous phrases, and he worried that his daughter might be in danger. In July 2017, after a court meeting, he called the police to check on the welfare of the children at Jessica's house. He described the situation in detail. He felt powerless since Jessica still interfered with the meetings, and he did not want to use force, fearing she would use this in court against him to strip him of his joint custody rights. The officers who responded reported that everything was fine, but the anxiety from the threats continued to grow. On July 12th, they discussed joint custody again. All attempts by Jessica to prevent this were unsuccessful, making her even more furious. During the day, Benjamin begins to receive more disturbing messages from his ex-wife. It was obvious to her that there was no legal way to limit the children's communication with their father, so she tried to irritate him further with her frightening messages. Benjamin contacted the police again and asked the patrol officers to go to the family home to check on the children's well-being. When the officers arrived, they again did not see anything suspicious. The report compiled by the patrolman stated that everything was fine, the family seemed normal, Jessica behaved calmly, and her son and daughter were in a good mood while watching a movie when the officers arrived. At that moment, Jessica insisted that Harper call Benjamin, realizing that he had called the police. All of this became part of her insidious plan to expose him as a liar. While the officer was in the house, he discussed the potential resumption of relations with Benjamin. Jessica denied wanting to reconcile, calling him a traitor who had cheated for a whole year. She couldn't forgive him and intended to use this in court to achieve sole custody of their daughter. She didn't want him in the children's lives. While the officer was filling out the report, Jessica began insisting that Benjamin and Meredith were very dangerous people, especially to the children. She claimed to have suffered from their behavior since the divorce process began and insisted that they were trying to portray her in a bad light. Jessica wanted to obtain a restraining order against them. The patrolman informed Jessica that, in order to get a restraining order, she would have to go through the court process after filing a report. After saying goodbye to the officers, she promised to file a statement in person soon, but that was not destined to happen. The next day, While Jessica's family was out of town, she went to her parents' house early in the morning and took a .40 caliber pistol that they used for self-defense. When relatives heard about this, Jessica warned her father about the need for a weapon, and he was not against it. They did not suspect the scale of the persecution that Jessica had arranged. She skillfully lied, making Benjamin look worse and referring to the persecution from him, that the danger emanating from her ex. Jessica claimed that she could not feel calm at home, she was simply afraid to be left alone with her 2 children. They were easily convinced that Benjamin and Meredith posed a threat, including to the children, and that the weapon would help protect them from what she described as extremely harmful communication. All of this sounded plausible, therefore, her parents had no problem with her needing the weapon for a while. Jessica planned to keep the gun in the house while the divorce process was ongoing. Jessica then sent text messages filled with accusations, now targeting everyone who knew Meredith. She managed to find information about the family and friends of Meredith, copying the messages to everyone, then telling them how Meredith had stolen her husband, destroyed her family, and was now trying to take the children. Jessica obtained the phone numbers of at least 5 friends of family members on social media. It seemed she was immersed in this all day, displaying behavior that resembled madness. She even personally called several people, relaying her story over her mobile phone. Some of Jessica's acquaintances became disappointed in her decency, causing real damage to her reputation. Benjamin also received even more terrifying messages. Jessica openly accused and intimidated him, stating that he would not receive anything, he would not gain access to Meredith and the children. Jessica wrote that because of his actions, he would have no chance of getting any of it, as she would not allow him to enjoy life after what he had done. Benjamin was extremely worried about this information and began to send Jessica message after message, trying to understand what she meant. However, she simply ignored all his questions, which only increased Benjamin's anxiety. He expressed his willingness to go to court for an emergency hearing regarding joint custody of the children, even threatened to try to take the children from her if she did not calm down. Finally, Jessica responded with a short message, "Your life will soon be better." Benjamin was sure that she was just mocking him and enjoying this situation. Jessica claimed that it was the last day she would experience pain, after which she ignored any attempts by Benjamin to contact her. On the morning of July 13, 2017, Jessica wrote to Benjamin again. She offered to meet so that Benjamin could answer some questions. However, Benjamin found everything very suspicious and hesitated to attend the meeting. He didn't suspect that this could turn out to be a fatal mistake. Benjamin tried to get her to talk on the phone to understand what she needed and why they couldn't discuss it without a meeting, but this only made Jessica even angrier. At 4:41 p.m., he received another message in which Jessica complained that she was tired of this bullying that never meant anything to Benjamin. In reality, old accusations and the most frightening threats she had ever voiced since the breakup emerged. Jessica's behavior was so alarming that Benjamin contacted her mother to discuss the situation, suspecting that Jessica was having a breakdown. He feared she could not control herself, might pose a danger to herself and the children. At that time, he was at work and could not leave. He did not suspect that while he was talking to Jessica's mother, Jessica was already driving to his apartment with bad intentions. At about 5 p.m., Jessica parked her car near the complex where Benjamin and Meredith lived. In the parking lot, Jessica saw Meredith, who had just returned from work and was sitting in her car, distracted by the mail on her mobile phone. Jessica approached her, pointed a gun, and shot through the glass, instantly killing her rival, whom she considered the cause of all her troubles. All this happened in broad daylight. As people were returning from work, the noise attracted numerous witnesses. After the incident, people saw Jessica get into her car and drive away. Neighbors contacted the police, reporting this and clarifying one frightening detail. At that time, there were 2 children in the car with the shooter. Witnesses described the shooter, and the police understood who they were talking about. They assumed that Benjamin was in danger. Jessica had enough time to act, but she was not going to go to Benjamin's workplace. Instead, she devised something much more sophisticated and stayed one step ahead of law enforcement. While the authorities were still looking for her in the city and were awaiting Benjamin's arrival at work, Jessica called Benjamin, told him that everyone he loved had left and that she would be next. Then Jessica hung up. It was the last call she made. Police eventually traced the call and went to Easley, 7 miles from the Benjamin home, where they saw her Jeep. The doors of the car were locked from the inside, and the engine was still running. Inside, they found 3 bodies, 2 children and Jessica herself, who was 36 years old. Jessica had persistently called Benjamin in hopes of meeting with him, perhaps intending him to be her first victim. However, he seemed to sense danger and avoided contact as much as possible, often opting to respond via a message on a messaging app. When she received a refusal, she flared up in anger and attacked Meredith, after which Jessica returned home. Near her house, she called Benjamin again. After a meaningless conversation, Jessica first attacked her 5-year-old daughter, then her 9-year-old son, after which she turned the gun on herself. Jessica used the same gun that she had borrowed from her parents on July 11th. During the investigation, detectives found out that Benjamin had been trying to obtain a restraining order against Jessica. He had filed for joint custody on the same day and had communicated with the police officer who came to check on the children. Jessica left 4 suicide notes, 1 for her mother, 1 for her father, 1 for her son's father, and 1 for her husband. In these notes, she expressed her love for her family and her regret for the pain her actions would cause them. Jessica insisted that she could no longer live with these feelings and believed that her children would also suffer without her, so she decided to take not only her life but theirs as well. In the letter to her son's father, she expressed gratitude for giving her her first child and apologized for the pain she had caused. Considering the content of these notes, the police investigated suspicions of domestic violence against the children. Judging by what Jessica wrote, it was possible she had harmed them as a way of exacting revenge on her unfaithful husband. However, nothing like this could be confirmed. As for the last note left by Jessica to Benjamin, it contained several short phrases in which she wished that Benjamin would experience the pain from his cruel act for the rest of his life. The note also stated that he would not be able to hurt them anymore. Among all the individuals involved in this case, Benjamin was the only survivor. The note turned out to be prophetic. Even to this day, he continues to live with the pain of losing his loved ones. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Sophie Toscan du Plantier. Sophie Bouniel was born on July 28, 1957, in Paris, France. She grew up in a renowned and wealthy family, with significant influence in the fashion and film industries. Sophie was artistic, talented, and assertive, which led her to a successful career as a film producer, making her a recognizable face and a symbol of success in the country. However, Sophie still prioritized her personal life and family happiness. In 1991, she married film producer Daniel Toscan du Plantier, and since then, she has been known as Sophie Toscan du Plantier. Their meeting was serendipitous, as both were entrenched in the film industry and matched each other's stature. They became symbols of luxury and wealth during that period, and their marriage attracted significant attention from the media. As both continued to thrive in their careers, they moved into a lavish mansion with Sophie's son from her first marriage. Sophie is a strong and energetic person, capable of resolutely defending her beliefs and continuously pursuing her dreams. Those close to her know that she is also a gentle, kind, and loving mother. The focus of her life was her son, Pierre-Louis Baudy. Furthermore, Sophie takes care of her image as a glamorous and fashionable woman, often attracting the attention of the media and reporters in the entertainment industry. As Sophie aged, she began to desire greater privacy, tranquility, and a family life away from the relentless scrutiny of admirers and strangers. In the early 90s, she started spending more time at her home in the rural area of Dunmanus West, near Cork, Ireland, a place she had enjoyed visiting as a child. Cork had become a popular retreat for affluent artists and writers drawn to its picturesque scenery. The hustle and bustle of Paris made her feel tired, so she decided to choose to live in this quiet and cozy place. In 1993, she purchased a cottage there. Unlike the villas she was accustomed to, this cottage posed some challenges, as it was in a remote area that was not always easy to access. However, for Sophie, the seclusion and peace it promised made it worth it. Even after she arrived, she faced issues with electricity and heating, which were often unreliable. Despite these difficulties, they did not significantly impact her ability to relax. Sophie was drawn to the local landscapes and the charm of the province because they helped her restore her emotional strength and inspired fond memories of her carefree childhood. After a long time away, she returned and was captivated by the beauty of nature, feeling as if she had fallen in love with it all over again. From then on, she chose to focus on the positives and disregard any inconveniences. Sophie typically spent her summers there but always returned to Paris, where she viewed this time as a period of spiritual and emotional renewal. Sophie usually goes there alone. The same thing happened in December 1996, when she was 39 years old, and she decided to visit Ireland to rejuvenate herself and read movie scripts before the new year. Arriving alone, she settled into her home in a quiet neighborhood. While she enjoyed her solitude, she wasn't a recluse. She interacted with her neighbors and childhood friends living nearby, was often seen around town. Sophie had established friendly relationships with many locals and always treated them as equals. Because of this, people didn't see her as just a woman from Bohemian Paris but rather as the familiar girl they remembered from their hometown. She engaged in pleasant conversations, deliberately steering clear of work and personal topics to avoid drawing attention and gossip. Before Christmas, a neighbor visited Sophie at her home. On December 23, 1996, around 10 a.m., she intended to chat about holiday plans and enjoy a cup of tea. However, instead of a friendly visit, she discovered a lifeless woman lying in the mud in front of the house. Alarmed, she immediately called the police to report a body near Sophie's residence. The condition of the body was so severe that she wasn't even sure it was Sophie. When the Irish police arrived, they encountered a gruesome scene. The woman's head was so badly damaged that she was unrecognizable, but she was confirmed to be Sophie Toscan du Plantier. At the time of her death, she was still wearing her nightgown and had on boots. The bedding in her bedroom was disheveled, suggesting that she had been awakened suddenly during the night or early morning and hurried outside, putting on her street shoes in the process. Nearby, authorities discovered a large concrete block covered in blood, which is believed to be the murder weapon. Bloody footprints led away from the scene towards the front gate, where the keys were still in the lock. Inside the house, 2 wine glasses were found in the dish drainer, leading detectives to speculate that the attack likely occurred outdoors, as there were no signs of a struggle indoors. Local police were not accustomed to dealing with such severe crimes in the area. The local precinct was small and lacked experienced investigators, so they had to wait for forensic experts from a larger city to arrive. These experts needed to thoroughly examine the crime scene in Sophie's body. They arrived just 1 day later, but during that time, Sophie's body remained at the outdoor scene. The weather was rainy and cold, and they could only cover her with plastic bags. Unfortunately, the damp conditions ruined some critical evidence. Once the investigation officially began, the police quickly noticed signs of a struggle on Sophie's hands. However, the passage of time made it difficult to evaluate these signs accurately. Most of the blood had been washed away by the rain, leaving investigators with very little evidence to work with. Forensic experts were engaged in reconstructing the incident that led to Sophie's death. It became clear that she died from blunt force trauma to the head. Some faint traces of blood were discovered on the gate and the entrance, but much of it had also been compromised by rain. Since Sophie was wearing boots and the blood was primarily found on the street side, investigators believed the attack likely began there. No signs of a struggle were found inside the house, and although 2 glasses of wine were found in the dish drainer, they could not be considered reliable evidence since they were already clean. It was uncertain when those glasses were used, as Sophie may have used them at different times by herself. Several DNA samples were collected from the crime scene, but in 1996, testing in profile comparison technology was very limited. This crucial evidence did not lead to any useful information. However, it was preserved in the archives. Detectives attempted to piece together the timeline of Sophie's activities since her arrival in Ireland. They discovered that she had arrived on December 21st. That same day, she was seen shopping at a grocery store, appearing relaxed while casually exploring the area. Sophie engaged in friendly conversations with several locals who were familiar with her. One store owner recalled that a man in a black coat and hat entered the store shortly after Sophie. Witnesses noted that this man appeared to be watching her and left as soon as she did, suggesting he might have been following her. It was obvious to those who were present that he showed no interest in shopping, as he didn't buy anything. No one else seemed to notice this suspicious individual on December 21st. On December 22nd, Sophie went for a walk along a path leading to a nearby castle perched on a rocky ledge. She took in the views from the observation deck before walking back to the city. She stopped by a local pub, where she ordered tea and chatted with some regular patrons. Eventually, Sophie returned to her home and did not go out again until late at night when she contacted her husband, Daniel, who was in Paris. This information helped investigators establish the timeline of the incident. Sophie's body was discovered at 10 a.m. the following morning, suggesting the attack occurred sometime between midnight and that time. Given the nature of the crime, investigators believed the killer was likely someone from Sophie's close circle, as is often the case in similar situations. The first suspect was Sophie's husband, Daniel. There were whispers that their marriage was struggling. As the police delved deeper into their family dynamics, they uncovered that the strain was due to Daniel's ongoing infidelity. Sophie had expressed her desire to end the relationship even before her trip to Ireland, viewing the getaway as a chance to relieve stress before the separation. Since both individuals were prominent and wealthy, the divorce would likely have been complex and highly publicized. Financial motivations can often lead to violent acts. However, Daniel was quickly cleared as a suspect when he claimed he was in France at the time of the murder, a claim corroborated by numerous witnesses, providing him with a solid alibi. The situation was further complicated by the fact that the murder occurred in a town with an insufficient police force, leaving them lacking the resources needed for a thorough investigation. This resulted in delays while they sifted through various theories and false claims. At this point, investigators considered the possibility that the murderer was familiar with both the victim, Sophie, and the local area, as the crime was committed without attracting attention. This explained the absence of outcry during the incident, even from neighborhood dogs, who would have recognized the perpetrator's scent but may not have reacted. Subsequently, detectives focused their attention on a man named Ian Kenneth Bailey. Ian was born in Manchester in 1957 and had a troubled past, as well as a troubled reputation. He started his career as a freelance journalist, owned a business, and held various jobs before moving to Ireland in 1991. At the time of the murder, Ian was living with his girlfriend and had experienced run-ins with local law enforcement. In 1991, Ian started a business but soon faced serious issues. He became involved in several troubling incidents after assaulting his business partner. Conflicts with authorities resulted in his conviction for assault later that year, and he spent some time in jail. Ian had a history with local police due to his temper and aggressive behavior, including previous domestic violence incidents that even led to his partner being hospitalized, although he was not jailed for those cases. Ian underwent a psychiatric evaluation, which revealed he had a narcissistic personality disorder. He was noted to be impulsive and cruel, with indications of various mental health issues. Experts described him as someone with very high self-esteem and a problem with alcohol, contributing to his unpredictable and violent outbursts. He claimed that his behavior was partly due to a difficult divorce that had occurred shortly before he moved to West Cork. There were additional reasons to consider him a suspect. His house was close to Sophie's, making it easy for him to approach her without being noticed. At that time, Ian was living with his girlfriend, Catherine Jules Thomas, who was also a local resident. Remarkably, on December 23rd, shortly after Sophie's body was discovered, they were among the first to arrive at the crime scene and possessed knowledge of many details about the crime. Catherine and Ian attempted to gather more information from the police to create a report. Ian claimed to be an independent journalist looking for a story, but he was denied access to the crime scene. The police noted that they were very insistent, even entering the house without permission. Upon checking his background, it became clear that he had a criminal history, raising doubts about his true identity as a reporter. Despite the police's objections, Ian managed to publish several negative articles. His aggressive pursuit of information only deepened the police's suspicions about him. The articles were filled with inappropriate details and speculation about Sophie's personal life, shocking her relatives with their lack of ethics and Ian's cynicism. Following the publication of these articles, a wave of public outrage ensued. Sophie's relatives publicly rejected Ian's claims by appearing on television. They believed that he was trying to tarnish Sophie's name for the sake of fame and profit. They agreed with law enforcement that Ian might be involved and regarded him with skepticism. When questioned by the police, Ian denied ever knowing Sophie. However, close friends of Sophie, who had known her since childhood, were convinced that Ian was connected to the crime. The media contributed to this belief by suggesting that Ian was involved in her death. Despite this, Ian maintained his innocence, citing his notes and a mysterious informant who allegedly provided him with crucial information, although he refused to reveal this person's identity. In Ian's writings, he not only focused on Sophie but also on a criminal within her circle of friends, who had hired a hitman. He suspected that this individual could be one of Sophie's ex-lovers or even her husband, who was in the process of divorcing her. While they were busy disputing these claims, a significant anonymous tip came in from a local resident. The witness reported seeing an unknown man near Sophie's house around 3 a.m. on December 23rd. The description of this man matched the appearance of a man that a local shop owner had seen chasing Sophie. Strangely, this anonymous witness provided a detailed and accurate description that matched Ian Kenneth Bailey's appearance exactly. A few days later, he was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. Once there, he acted very nervously, created a scene, and made threats regarding the situation. Detectives quickly noticed suspicious scratches on his face and hands. When questioned about them, he claimed that he had been hurt by a Christmas tree that fell while he was cutting it down in the forest. Police were skeptical of Ian's explanation and took photos of the scratches, which only made him more agitated. Although his behavior seemed overly aggressive, he attributed it to his mental health issues. He denied knowing Sophie and insisted on his own theory, suggesting that one of her former partners might have hired someone to kill her. He loudly claimed that it was Daniel, not him, who should be investigated. Authorities believed that the criminal was a local who knew the area well, which explained how he could get to Sophie's house without leaving any evidence. Ian argued that the forensic team took too long to arrive at the crime scene, allowing rain to wash away any potential evidence, and insisted that being a local was irrelevant. He criticized the initial investigation as negligent and accused the police of attempting to pin the blame on him. Detectives interviewed Ian's friends, who reported seeing him at a local pub the night before the crime. Ian had no scratches on his face, making it improbable that he ventured into the forest at night to retrieve a Christmas tree after leaving the bar. Despite numerous objections, he was arrested on February 10, 1997, after new information emerged. Another key witness, Ian's ex-wife Jules Thomas, provided a statement. She was very concerned about potential charges from the police, which prompted her to speak up. She confirmed that she indeed met Sophie in the store on December 21, 1996. Ian learned about Sophie's arrival and went to find her to get a story. Jules also suggested that he might have followed Sophie to an observation deck on the 22nd, where she went to admire the castle. On that same day, when Ian returned, he acted very mysteriously and strangely, even commenting that something terrible might happen in the city that night. He never clarified what had made him anxious. Later that evening, Ian went out for a walk, but when he returned, he left again, only to come back an hour later. He assumed Jules was asleep, but she woke up several times throughout the night and did not find him at home. Finally, Ian confessed that he had gone to the nearby studio to work until 9 a.m. The inconsistencies in his statements and Jules's admissions led to his detention. However, within 12 hours, no solid evidence was found linking him to the murder. Under Irish law, if there is insufficient evidence to convict a suspect within 12 hours of arrest, the suspect must be released. As a result, he was released due to insufficient evidence. Despite being a prime suspect, law enforcement had no choice but to let him go. However, public suspicion towards him increased. Ian's behavior became increasingly erratic, which he attributed to mental health issues. The stress of being implicated as a possible murderer took a toll on his well-being, and he began experiencing hallucinations. He also tried to blame the police for defaming him, but his efforts were unsuccessful. The rumors he spread began to sound nonsensical. On January 27, 1998, they decided to arrest Ian again. He maintained his innocence and argued that the police had no evidence against him. Detectives pointed to the only DNA evidence found at the crime scene, which did not belong to Sophie. However, it was of poor quality due to contamination from prolonged exposure to the elements. This made it impossible to definitively link Ian to the murder, creating a significant hurdle for the investigation. Under Irish law, an individual can only be arrested twice without being charged for a crime. Ian maintained his innocence throughout the process. During his second arrest, authorities had just 12 hours to establish his involvement in the murder. He felt pressure to confess, which only fueled his anger. He sought to leverage his connections in journalism to discredit the local police, claiming that authorities were attempting to make him a scapegoat. Detectives believed Ian was simply aware of his legal rights and was stalling. Despite public suspicion of his guilt, he attributed his unusual interest in the case to his work as a journalist, stating that he was only pursuing a sensational story. This explained his presence while Sophie was alive. The police could not find any evidence against him, and he was released, leading to a standstill in the investigation. In 2003, Ian sued several news organizations for libel, as his connection to the murder had never been established. He sought to clear his name through legal action against the media. During the trial, multiple witnesses testified against him, claiming to have seen him on the day of Sophie's death. The most significant testimony came from an anonymous witness who reported seeing Ian near Sophie's house at night and accused him of lying. Jules Thomas, speaking for the prosecution, described Ian as rude and unstable, suggesting that he might be capable of violence. Nevertheless, the Irish authorities maintained that they lacked sufficient evidence to charge him. No conclusive evidence was found, and the DNA samples collected could not be fully analyzed, leaving officials constrained by the law. Sophie's family was deeply disappointed by the lack of progress in the investigation into her death. Relatives, including her husband, viewed the police's response as inadequate. In 2008, the family sought justice by appealing to the French court for an investigation but faced numerous obstacles. The key witness in the case later revealed that he had falsely accused journalist Ian out of fear of the police. After this revelation, Ian decided to take legal action against the Irish government for wrongful prosecution. His lawyer based their strategy on the witness's retraction of his statement. However, in 2019, a court in France began the trial without Ian's participation. Under French law, if a French citizen is killed abroad, the trial can take place in France. About 30 witnesses were summoned to testify. As a result of the proceedings, the court convicted Ian Kenneth Bailey of murder and sentenced him to 25 years in prison. However, the Irish Supreme Court refused to extradite him, arguing that the court's decision was flawed due to a lack of sufficient evidence. Consequently, Ian remained in Ireland, avoiding extradition and any legal consequences there. In 2022, a significant development occurred when the Irish and French judicial systems collaborated to investigate Sophie's murder. They reviewed all the case materials and re-examined the evidence, despite some being lost or damaged. There were suggestions that an accomplice of Daniel might have been involved, and Ian's account could have shed light on the truth. Unfortunately, Ian Kenneth Bailey passed away from cardiac arrest in January 2024 before he could learn the outcome of the investigation. The police searched his apartment, hoping to gather DNA samples for comparison with evidence collected during the original investigation in the 1990s. With advancements in DNA profiling and analysis, there was a renewed opportunity to uncover the truth about what happened. Nearly 30 years had passed since Sophie's death, and there was finally hope for answers. However, none had emerged yet. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Michelle Lowe. In the San Diego, California area, Michelle Lowe lived with her family, which included her parents, her brother Michael, The house was always full of life and laughter. Michelle's mother worked as a nurse and inspired her daughter to follow in her footsteps. After her mother died, Michelle decided to finish what her mother had started and see it through to the end. She became a source of support for her family, learning to drive, cooking, and always giving advice. Michelle is a nursing student at Samuel Merritt University in Oakland and is interning at Kaiser Permanente Medical Center in Hayward. On May 27, 2011, after a long shift at the hospital, Michelle decided to quickly run to her car in the parking lot to get something. However, on her way to the car, she suddenly stopped, changed direction, and a few minutes later, a white Honda CR-V quickly drove out of the parking lot. When they began gathering all the students towards the end of her shift, Michelle was nowhere to be seen. Her personal belongings were left in the break room, her phone was not answering. This behavior was completely unlike her, and her instructor suspected something was wrong, so they immediately called the police. The next morning, 10 hours after Michelle's disappearance, there was still no news of her. Her brother and other relatives began searching for her, joining forces with the police and volunteers. Michelle's friends and colleagues came to the police station, clearly concerned about her disappearance. They insisted that her behavior had been too strange and that no one was willing to leave before a full investigation began. The officers quickly realized how serious the situation was. Traces of blood were found in the parking lot where her Honda had been parked. At about 9 a.m., they found her Honda CR-V itself. It was locked and neatly parked in a visitor spot near an apartment building just a kilometer from the hospital. Inside the car were her laptop and someone else's student ID from Sal Merritt University, which lay on the back seat. Michelle had no connection to the owner of the ID, and it remained unclear why it was there. Later, it was discovered that the card had been stolen a couple of days before Michelle's disappearance. Most likely, the attacker had stolen the ID to gain access to the building and possibly lured Michelle to the parking lot before disappearing with her in her own car. Detectives immediately understood that this was not the work of a random criminal, but someone who knew her schedule well. The theory that someone had simply attacked her randomly in the parking lot seemed unlikely. Hospital records showed that 30 minutes after Michelle walked into the parking lot, the emergency room received a call. At 7:30 p.m., the emergency department received a call. The caller introduced herself as Michelle and asked to speak to the teacher. The nurse who answered the call informed the caller that she would need to transfer the call to another department, but the caller insisted that the nurse not do so. She mentioned that she just wanted the teacher to know that Michelle had called to inform her that Michelle would not be able to come back that night because she had received a message that her father had had a heart attack. When Michelle's car was being towed away for further examination, her brother Michael unexpectedly received a message from her phone, "I'm fine." Then another message came, "I'm not missing. The phone is glitching and has erased all data." These messages drained the battery. Shortly afterward, friends began receiving strange messages, one after another, claiming that she had a flat tire, that she was back in Reno, that she needed a break from social media, and that she was not feeling well and wanted to rest. Michelle's ex-boyfriend noticed the activity on her phone and immediately wrote to her, but the reply was, "Who is this?" By May 31st, the reward for information on Michelle's whereabouts had increased to $20,000, and after a few days, it reached almost $100,000. The family hired a private detective, and more than 100 volunteers joined the search, dividing into 14 teams to cover an area of several kilometers. The reward continued to grow. During the investigation into Michelle's relationships, one interesting detail emerged. She had problems with an old friend named Giselle Daiwag Esteban. The girls had been close for many years and even went to college together. Giselle was dating a man named Scott, and they had a 6-year-old daughter. However, their relationship had ended on a bad note, which sparked the issues between Michelle and Giselle. Long before Giselle and Scott started dating, Michelle had gone on a couple of dates with Scott but quickly realized that they were better suited as friends. There was never any romance or intimacy between them. Despite this, Giselle became obsessively jealous. Her behavior grew increasingly strange, and her relationship with Michelle began to deteriorate. Michelle continued to be friends with Scott and refused to stop communicating with him just because Giselle wanted her to. She ignored Giselle's strange and obsessive claims. When detectives came to Giselle to ask her a few questions, she did not hide her obvious antipathy towards Michelle and didn't even try to pretend otherwise. Giselle asserting that she had long asked Michelle to stay away from her daughter and to stop communicating with their mutual friends. She described their relationship as torment, calling Michelle a best friend who cheated on her with her ex-fiancé. The detectives then found Scott, who honestly shared his version of events. They noticed that he was sincerely worried and even participated in the search for Michelle, attending meetings and vigils organized in her honor. Scott shared how Giselle behaved towards him and his family. At some point, when their relationship reached another crisis, he tried to improve his relationship with Giselle for the sake of their daughter. However, these attempts always ended in failure. He showed the detectives a long correspondence with Giselle, where she constantly mentioned Michelle and wrote increasingly aggressive messages, such as, "I hope you find that nasty." Giselle accused Michelle of destroying their family and threatened that she would soon become unnecessary. Giselle even sent messages directly to Michelle, insulting her and accusing her of ruining her family. Additionally, she followed Michelle to San Diego. Scott also showed the police a recording of one of Giselle's outbursts of rage. In the recording, she was sitting in a car with their daughter in the back seat. Giselle insisted that Scott be honest about Michelle and threatened to kill them both if he lied about his relationship with Michelle. She gave him what she called a last and final warning. Scott stated that Giselle was temporarily placed in a psychiatric clinic, where she was diagnosed with manic depressive disorder and bipolar disorder. After that, Giselle continued to come to Scott's house, sometimes even going inside and just sitting in a room until she was noticed. Scott was able to achieve complete custody of their daughter, which further angered Giselle, prompting her to move back to Hayward to be closer to them. Just 3 days before Michelle went missing, Scott filed for a temporary restraining order against Giselle, claiming that she had threatened him and his family. On the same day, he accused Giselle of breaking into his home and into their daughter's room. The police continued to review CCTV footage in the hope of obtaining clear images of Michelle's car. Her brother did not believe that his sister could simply get lost, as she always stayed in touch with the family and even reminded them to call their grandmother on Mother's Day. A reward for any information about Michelle's whereabouts continued to grow, and the search remained active. The police still hoped to find Michelle alive, but the evidence they gathered indicated that their chances were diminishing with each passing day. Their worst fears were confirmed when traces of Michelle's blood were found in her car. They called her family and informed them that the case was no longer being treated as a disappearance. Nevertheless, Michelle's family, determined to continue searching for her and hoping for the best, refused to believe the worst until there was definitive proof. Giselle remained the only suspect in the case, and the police invited her for a full interrogation. By that time, she was already pregnant with her second child. During the conversation, she admitted that she was indeed at the hospital the night Michelle went missing, supposedly for a routine medical examination. When asked about their friendship, Giselle referred to Michelle as her sister but noted that their relationship had deteriorated due to a mistake made by Michelle and Scott. Giselle was released, but the police continued to monitor her, even installing a tracker on her car. Investigators believed she was connected to Michelle's disappearance, but they doubted whether she had acted alone due to her petite stature of only 158 centimeters. In the meantime, the police stepped up their investigation. They questioned Giselle's neighbors, who confirmed that Giselle and Michelle had been friends. Giselle told the press that she had nothing to do with Michelle's disappearance. Even her father joined the search for Michelle, flying in from Vietnam and calling on all local residents to help. An interesting turn of events occurred when Scott called the police and reported that he had found Michelle's phone in the back of his mother's car. Everything indicated that Giselle had planted it, since the tracker on her car showed that she had driven up to Scott's house several times. Security at the medical college where Michelle studied analyzed the data from the stolen student card, which had been used to access the building on May 26, the day before Michelle's disappearance. The cameras recorded Giselle. She had figured out the network technology and gained access to the card, stating that she was interested in enrolling. After receiving the card, Giselle began checking door locks, entering various classrooms, and inspecting the teacher's desk, where she found a student schedule, one of which belonged to Michelle. Now knowing the exact time when Michelle was supposed to be at college the next day, Giselle left the building. Analysis of phone data showed that on the day of her disappearance, Michelle and Giselle were in the same place at the same time. The next day, Giselle went into the Apple store and asked to unlock the iPhone, explaining to the technician that her daughter had accidentally locked her phone. After successfully unlocking it, Giselle left and went to Chuck E. Cheese, where cameras caught her texting. At the same time, Michelle's friends started receiving strange and obviously fake messages, which were confirmed by cell phone towers as coming from Michelle's phone. Despite there being no body, the police already had enough evidence to arrest Giselle Esteban for murder. When she was arrested at the front door of her home, a pair of shoes with Michelle's blood on the soles were also found in Giselle's car, along with a lock of Giselle's hair and her DNA on the steering wheel. Giselle had searched the internet for information on how to cause a heart attack without a trace, follow a person without being caught, and how to pick locks. She also searched for information on toxic gases such as potassium chloride and carbon monoxide. After Michelle went missing, her name was entered into the search bar more than 300 times. 10 days after Giselle's arrest, Michelle's remains were found in a shallow grave in a remote area, about 20 kilometers from Giselle's home. 3 months had passed, and the body was badly decomposed, so the exact cause of death could not be determined. The Alameda County coroner confirmed the identity of the remains in September 2011. Giselle Esteban appeared in court. She pleaded not guilty, claiming that the murder was an accident caused by a moment of anger and that Michelle allegedly provoked her. Her lawyer tried to prove that it was not a premeditated murder but one of chance. However, Giselle herself did not testify and appeared absolutely emotionless in court, without expressing a drop of remorse. Prosecutors assumed that Giselle had planned the attack in advance. She had tracked down Michelle, studied her schedule, waited for her to come out to the parking lot, and then attacked her with a sharp object. This explained the traces of blood, how she could load Michelle's body into the car and take it away. The prosecutor called Giselle a sociopath, noting her coldness and calculation. He emphasized that this was a carefully planned attack on a person who did not even suspect the danger. Giselle Esteban was found guilty of first-degree murder. She did not react to the verdict and left the courtroom in silence. At his sentencing hearing on December 10, Esteban was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the right to parole. Michelle's family was disappointed. They had hoped for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. With such a sentence, they would be forced to attend a parole hearing when she files the appropriate petition. Michelle's brother, Michael, was deeply distressed by the loss. He recalled how his sister had planned to follow in their late mother's footsteps and become a nurse to help people. For the family, the loss of Michelle was immense, and to this day, they hope that justice will prevail. Nothing can bring back their beloved sister and daughter. Michelle's dream of becoming a nurse and following in her mother's footsteps was cut short when Giselle killed her in the parking lot of a Bay Area hospital. It was a fit of jealousy when Giselle mistakenly thought that Michelle had started dating her boyfriend. Michelle's family plans to actively participate in the hearings to remind the judges how cruel this case is and to show how tragic their sister's fate is. The judge noted that in order to be released early, Giselle would have to show sincere remorse, which was not observed from her at the time of the trial. Shortly after her arrest, Giselle gave birth to a boy, who was handed over for adoption. There were rumors that Scott might have been the father, but he denied it, and the real father's name was never revealed. Lee's family continued to volunteer, helping other families dealing with missing loved ones and raising awareness of such cases. Michael said he was sure his sister was now in heaven with their mother, helping him come to terms with his loss and be less afraid of the future. Michelle's father has always been proud of her diligence and busy life but admits that he has never asked her to spend Father's Day with him. Now he regrets and dreams of turning back time, even just for one day, to invite her to enjoy this vacation together. After the trial, Michelle's family did not stop fighting for justice. They decided to direct their pain and anger toward creating an organization in her honor. The Michelle Lowe Foundation has become an important platform for helping families who have lost their loved ones and for those looking for missing relatives. They have organized annual events and fundraisers supporting search services, began advising other families, teaching them how to act correctly in the first hours after the disappearance of loved ones. Every year on Michelle's birthday, her friends, family, and those who were helped by the foundation gather together to remember her bright personality. It became not just a day of mourning but a celebration of her life, a day of support and love. People bring flowers and launch white balloons into the sky, symbolizing hope and memory. Scott, who was drawn into this terrible story, also took part in the work of the foundation. He decided to change his life and devote himself to raising his daughter. He actively participated in activities so that others would not face such a tragedy. As for Giselle, her chances for early release were minimal. Even after a while, her refusal to repent and emotional indifference made her a symbol of the destructive influence of hatred and envy. The story of how jealousy and unfounded suspicions can destroy lives became an important lesson for many, especially for those who suffer from toxic relationships and mistrust. Ultimately, despite all the tragedy, Michelle's light continued to illuminate the path for others. Her story and memory became a source of strength and inspiration, reminding everyone that love and compassion are stronger than hatred and jealousy. Joshua Powell was born on January 20, 1976, in Puyallup, Washington, to Stephen and Terica Powell. He had 4 siblings, Michael, John, Jennifer, and Alina. However, life in the Powell family was far from normal. Their father, Stephen, was controlling and inappropriate, fostering a toxic atmosphere for his children. He shared adult material with his sons and set no boundaries, exposing them to adult content that influenced their behavior. As a teenager, Joshua acted out violently. He once killed his sister's pet gerbil in a fit of anger. He also threatened his mother with a knife during an argument, and when he felt desperate, he threatened to harm himself. In 2000, Joshua met Susan Cox at a church dinner. She was kind, hardworking, and full of life, and they got married within a year. Unbeknownst to Susan, her marriage would encounter serious challenges. Initially, they lived with Joshua's father, Stephen, in Washington, and that was when things became really disturbing. Stephen began to obsess over Susan. He watched her with a camera, used a small mirror to look into the bathroom, stole her underwear from the washing machine, read her diary, and posted love songs online under a pseudonym. Finally, one day, he confessed his feelings to Susan. This conversation, which included Susan's panicked rejection, was accidentally recorded on his own camera. It became the final straw. Joshua and Susan decided to pack up and move to Utah, hoping to forget about Stephen. For a while, life seemed to stabilize for Joshua and Susan, who had 2 sons named Charlie and Braden. They relocated to West Valley City, Utah, in search of a fresh start. However, Susan felt increasingly suffocated in her marriage. Her friends noticed her unhappiness and learned that Joshua hardly showed her any affection, creating a sense of distance between them. By the summer of 2008, their situation had deteriorated significantly. Joshua and Susan argued constantly, even in front of their children. Joshua had become extremely controlling, making all the decisions and leaving Susan feeling trapped. Their marriage was not just struggling, it was falling apart. He took complete control of their finances, forcing Susan to rely on him for even minor expenses. He reduced their grocery budget, refused to buy her new clothes, and required her to justify every dollar she spent. While he guarded their bank accounts, he had no issue spending money on himself, wasting thousands while Susan struggled to afford basic necessities. The issue extended to their vehicles as well. Although they owned 2 cars, Joshua claimed the family car as his own. Instead of allowing Susan to drive to work, he made her ride a bike, regardless of the weather or her fatigue. Moreover, he started to distance himself from their shared faith. Although they had been active members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Joshua began refusing to attend services with Susan and their sons. He mocked her beliefs, made excuses to avoid church, and discouraged her involvement. The most painful betrayal came when Joshua refused to sever ties with his father, Stephen, despite Susan's insistence that he was dangerous and unwelcome in their lives. Joshua ignored her concerns, continued to communicate with his father, and allowed their young children to maintain contact with him. By 2007, Joshua had accumulated over $200,000 in debt, adding to their marital strain as Susan recognized that their situation was worsening. In response, she began documenting everything. In 2008, Susan created a video documenting the damage in her home, which she attributed to Joshua. That same year, she wrote a secret will ominously stating that if she were to die, it might not be an accident, even if it appeared to be one. Just a year later, she disappeared without a trace. On December 6, 2009, everything seemed normal. That morning, Susan, Charlie, and Braden went to church as usual. Susan interacted with friends and tended to her boys, and nothing appeared out of the ordinary. After church, a neighbor visited the family and spent some time with them before leaving. No one could have predicted that this would be the last time anyone would see Susan. The following morning, December 7th, something felt off. Susan didn't show up for work and hadn't called in sick or requested a day off. At the same time, the boys' nanny noticed that Joshua hadn't dropped them off, which was unusual for him. Concerned, she tried to contact the family, but no one answered. As hours went by without any word from Susan or Joshua, worry turned to fear. Joshua's mother, Terica, and his sister, Jennifer, learned about the situation and rushed to the house. When they arrived, they found the doors locked, the curtains drawn, and no one inside. The unsettling silence heightened their anxiety. They knocked and called out, but received no response. In a state of panic, they called the police. Officers arrived and forced entry into the home, fearing that the family might have been victims of carbon monoxide poisoning or faced another emergency. What the officers discovered inside the house was deeply concerning. Although the house was empty, something felt wrong. Susan's purse, wallet, and identification were still there, untouched. Her cell phone was later found in the family's only car, a Chrysler Town & Country minivan that Joshua had been using. It was turned off. There were no signs of a struggle, but one detail stood out. 2 box fans were set up in the living room, blowing air directly onto a damp spot on the couch. This unusual detail felt unsettling. Hours later, around 5 p.m., Joshua returned home with his sons, Charlie and Braden. The police quickly brought him in for questioning. His explanation was strange. He claimed that after midnight on December 7th, he took his 2 young sons, ages 4 and 2, on a spontaneous camping trip to the Pony Express Trail in western Utah, a remote area characterized by snow and freezing temperatures. He mentioned that Susan stayed home to sleep. His story raised many questions. Who would take toddlers on an impromptu camping trip in sub-freezing weather in the middle of the night, especially when they had work and daycare to prepare for in just a few hours? Police found it suspicious that Joshua had not notified his boss about not coming to work that day. When asked why, he gave a puzzling answer. He claimed he had lost track of the days and thought it was Sunday instead of Monday. Investigators aimed to confirm his story by sending a team to the area where he claimed to have camped. However, they found no evidence to support his claim, no tire tracks in the snow, no footprints, no fire pit, nothing. It was as if he had never gone on that trip. Things took an even stranger turn. On December 8th, after a second police interview, Joshua suddenly rented a car from Salt Lake City International Airport and then disappeared for nearly 18 hours. His whereabouts during that time remain unknown. When he finally reappeared, he called his mother from Interstate 84 in Tremonton, Utah, sounding disoriented and giving vague answers about his location. Later, he told his sister Jennifer that he had been driving around the city aimlessly, randomly getting on and off different freeways. When police examined the rental car, they found that he had added 87 miles to the odometer. Where did he go? What was he doing? No one knows, but it was becoming increasingly evident that Joshua was concealing something. 2 days after Susan went missing, the police conducted another search of her home. This time, They found something concerning on the floor, traces of Susan's blood. While it wasn't a large amount, it was enough to raise serious questions. Inside the house, they also discovered life insurance policies totaling $1.5 million and a handwritten letter from Susan. In the letter, she expressed her growing fear for her life and mentioned being terrified of Joshua. Years later, DNA tests confirmed that one blood sample belonged to Susan, while another matched an unknown male, whose identity remains unknown. As the police investigated Joshua's actions following Susan's disappearance, his behavior appeared increasingly suspicious. He emptied her retirement accounts, canceled her chiropractic appointments, and withdrew his sons from daycare, all within days of her vanishing. It seemed he was trying to erase her from their lives. Additionally, Joshua had previously talked to co-workers about how to dispose of a body in an abandoned mine shaft. At the time, people dismissed it as a strange comment, but now, it seemed more significant. As investigators worked to understand what happened to Susan, they questioned the only other witnesses present with Joshua that night, his sons. 4-year-old Charlie was interviewed, and surprisingly, he confirmed that the camping trip took place. However, his account included a significant twist. He claimed that their mother was with them. According to Charlie, Susan was in the car that night but never returned home. Weeks later, a teacher overheard Charlie make a chilling remark, stating that his mother was dead, without any details or explanations, suggesting he had come to accept this reality. Additionally, Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, reported a troubling incident. At daycare, Charlie's younger brother, Braden, drew a picture of a van. When asked about it, Braden pointed to the back of the van and said, "Mommy was in the trunk." This raised further suspicions for the police, who were becoming increasingly convinced that Joshua was aware of what had happened to Susan. They intended to bring Joshua in for further questioning and requested all footage of his interviews with local news outlets. However, Joshua showed no willingness to cooperate. On December 14th, he obtained legal representation. In the following days, he became more distant and less responsive to the authorities. Just before Christmas, he gathered his sons and left Utah, returning to Puyallup, Washington, to live with his father, Stephen Powell. By December 24th, police identified him as a person of interest in the case. Sadly, the situation was far from resolved. In 2010, Joshua moved into his father's house in Puyallup, bringing his 2 young sons, Charlie and Braden. Joshua made it clear he wasn't returning to Utah, announcing plans to rent out their home in West Valley City. Some reports indicated he left due to losing his job, but those who knew him felt he was fleeing from something. Shortly after settling in Washington, a website called SusanPowell.org emerged. It claimed to be the official site for Susan Powell, but instead of helping to find her, it focused on defending Joshua. The site accused Susan's family, including her sister Jennifer Graves, and even the LDS Church of conducting a smear campaign against him. Some posts went so far as to suggest that Susan had fled to Brazil with another missing person, journalist Stephen Kocher, a completely unfounded theory. It didn't take long for people to suspect that Joshua and his father, Stephen, were behind the website. Then, by late 2010, the Powells made a startling claim. They suggested that Susan had been mentally ill and had intentionally abandoned her family. This seemed like a desperate attempt to change the narrative, but Susan's parents quickly rebutted it. There was no evidence to support the idea that Susan left on her own or that she was mentally unstable. While Joshua tried to portray himself as the victim, the police began focusing on his father, Stephen. A family friend revealed that Stephen had been obsessed with Susan for years. When investigators examined Stephen's computers, they discovered 4,500 images of Susan, many taken without her consent. These were not just ordinary photographs, they included disturbing close-ups of her body. Police began investigating Joshua's brother, Michael Powell, after he displayed suspicious behavior. Shortly after Susan went missing, he sold his broken Ford Taurus to a junkyard in Pendleton, Oregon. This raised eyebrows, especially when he later requested satellite images of the lot, seemingly to monitor the car. When authorities tracked it down, they used cadaver dogs, which indicated that human remains had once been in the trunk. Unfortunately, DNA tests did not yield conclusive results, leaving a key question in the case unanswered. In September 2011, police thought they had a significant lead. While searching Topaz Mountain in Utah, a location frequently visited by Joshua, they discovered what looked like a grave site. The ground appeared to have been recently disturbed and showed signs of digging. Investigators spent several days examining the area, but ultimately found no remains. Meanwhile, tensions between the Joshua families and the Susan families escalated. After police searched Stephen's home, both he and Joshua took to the media to advocate for their side of the story. Stephen claimed that he and Susan were developing a romantic relationship before her disappearance, using old journal entries from her teenage years to argue that she had always been unstable. A judge did not accept this narrative. He ruled that Stephen and Joshua could not publish any of Susan's personal writings and ordered them to return or destroy any journals they had already made public. Then the situation escalated. On September 22, the police arrested Stephen on charges of voyeurism and child abuse. Investigators found secretly recorded videos in his home featuring young girls, adult women, and, most alarmingly, Susan. It was apparent that Stephen posed a serious danger, and authorities began to suspect that Joshua might not be innocent either. John Long, Washington's Assistant Attorney General, announced that Joshua was now part of the investigation. The day after Stephen's arrest, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, filed for custody of his grandchildren, Charlie and Braden. Initially, the court granted him only temporary custody, allowing Joshua the opportunity to regain custody if he moved out of Stephen's home. Joshua rented a house in South Hill, Washington, presenting it as if he were complying with the order. However, authorities later claimed he never actually lived there. By this time, Joshua's sister, Jennifer, publicly expressed her belief that he was involved in Susan's disappearance. As the custody battle escalated, the court ordered Joshua to undergo psychological evaluations. A forensic psychologist, James Manley, evaluated Joshua and discovered concerning patterns. Joshua denied having any normal human flaws or weaknesses and displayed highly controlling behavior toward his sons. He also exhibited signs of deep paranoia, frequently blaming the police and media for his difficulties. Despite these findings, there was no direct evidence of abuse. Therefore, Manley allowed Joshua to visit his sons several times a week under the supervision of a social worker. However, in January 2012, everything changed. When examining computers seized from Joshua's home, police found about 400 images of child abuse, bestiality, and incest. The images had been cached from a previous owner, but Joshua had viewed them. Although they weren't illegal, the psychologist handling his case was deeply concerned. Joshua was ordered to undergo a full psychological evaluation and a polygraph test. As the pressure mounts, Joshua becomes desperate and is about to commit a horrific act that no one could have imagined. On February 5, 2012, social worker Elizabeth Griffin Hall pulled up to Joshua's house in South Hill, Washington, for what was supposed to be a routine supervised visit between him and his two young boys, Charlie and Braden. The court had ordered these visits to be monitored for the children's safety, so Hall was there to ensure everything went smoothly. However, the moment she arrived, something felt off. As soon as the boys reached the front door, Joshua yanked them inside and slammed it shut right in Hall's face. She barely had time to react before she heard the deadbolt click. She pounded on the door, shouting for him to open it, but he didn't respond. Panicked, she pulled out her phone and called 911. Her voice shook as she told the dispatcher what had just happened, that she was supposed to be supervising the visit, that Joshua had locked her out, and that she feared for the boys' safety. She begged them to send help quickly. Immediately afterwards, a terrible explosion occurred, shaking the house. The force of the explosion propelled Hall backward. Within seconds, flames erupted, engulfing the home in thick black smoke. The intense heat scorched the air around her, leaving her immobilized by fear. Neighbors rushed over, some shouting and others already calling emergency services, but it was too late. The fire spread rapidly, and there was no chance for anyone inside to escape alive. Investigators later confirmed their initial suspicions. Joshua had planned this act. It wasn't an accident or a tragic gas leak. He had doused the house in gasoline, turning it into a death trap. Officially, Charlie and Braden died from carbon monoxide poisoning, but the reality was more horrific. Joshua had attacked them with a hatchet before starting the fire. The day before the tragedy, he emptied his bank account, donated the boys' toys to charity, and sent cold, emotionless goodbye emails to family and friends. Charlie and Braden were buried beside their mother, whom they would never see again, but their family's struggle continued. A year after Joshua took the lives of his two young sons and himself, his brother Michael tragically followed suit. On February 11, 2013, he ended his own life. His ending his own life sparked even more suspicion. In 2012, police questioned him several times about his abandoned Ford Taurus, which was found at a wrecking yard in Oregon. When asked why he left it there, he was vague and did not provide clear answers. Investigators later indicated they believed both Joshua and Michael were involved in Susan's murder. Despite extensive searching, Susan's case remained unsolved and hopeless. By May 21, 2013, the West Valley City Police officially closed the investigation into her disappearance. In the same year, James Manley, the psychologist who assessed Joshua for the state of Washington, acknowledged that he had always suspected Joshua was connected to Susan's disappearance. However, he did not include these suspicions in his official report, as his role was to evaluate Joshua's parenting, not to investigate a crime. The legal dispute over Susan's estate continued for years. In March 2015, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, finally prevailed in a lengthy legal battle against Terica and Alina Powell, who had attempted to declare Susan legally dead in order to collect life insurance. As a result, Chuck gained full control of the estate. In 2019, a surprising revelation came to light. KSL, a radio station in Salt Lake City, reported on its detailed podcast about Susan's case, called Cold, that disturbing child abuse material found by West Valley City Police, which contributed to Joshua losing custody of his sons, did not actually belong to him. In fact, it wasn't even found on his computer. The explicit images were located on a second-hand computer that Susan had bought from fellow members of her LDS church. The previous owners had viewed the content, but by the time this information surfaced, it was too late to rectify the situation. The damage had already been done. In early 2022, there was one final attempt to locate Susan's remains. A team led by Dave Sparks, known from the TV show Diesel Brothers, searched a remote mine shaft in the Utah desert in hopes of bringing Susan home. They discovered rib bones, what looked like human vertebrae, and pieces of clothing, indicating that someone had died there. The remains were sent for DNA testing, but once again, there was no success. The bones did not belong to Susan, and they were not even human. A pair of pants found with the remains tested positive for male DNA, raising another question: to whom did they belong? More importantly, will Susan Powell ever be found? Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Mary Stauffer. Mary was born in West Duluth, Minnesota, USA, and her family moved to the neighboring town of Hummontown when she was 10 years old. She had 3 siblings, all of whom graduated from a local school and planned to go to college. Mary attended college and graduated in 1965. She loved working with children and dreamed of teaching, a dream that came true when she got a job at a school. She is a math teacher. In her personal life, everything was also successful. She married a seminary graduate, Irv Stauffer. They were devout Baptists. They first went to the Philippines as missionaries in 1967, and the trip was successful. Mary taught in Minneapolis for a couple of years. Then they moved to Polk, Nebraska, where her husband was asked to become the pastor of a congregation. They dedicated themselves to serving the church there, where both of their children were born. In 1975, they returned to the Philippines to undertake a 4-year mission trip. There, they planted new churches on the islands and returned home to Minnesota in 1979. Mary was planning to go to the Philippines again, this time intending to take her children with her. A few days before the family was to leave for the Philippines, while they were in the suburbs of St. Paul, they were destined to meet a person who would turn their lives upside down. On May 16, 1980, the day began normally for 8-year-old Elizabeth and her mother, Mary. They arrived and parked near a hair salon on Cleveland Avenue. When they left the salon, they headed to their car. Mary immediately noticed a young man, who looked to be about 30, confidently approaching them from the direction of a busy intersection. He looked at them strangely, and Mary instinctively felt uncomfortable under his gaze, but she did not panic since they were in a busy area. This young man did not look particularly dangerous. He stood out because of his thick glasses. Mary assumed he was merely asking for directions or something similar. However, when he approached the car, he took a gun from his belt, placed it next to the hood, and demanded a ride. In horror, Mary was ready to give up the keys to the car that the church had given them if only he would let them go. But the criminal did not want the keys. He forced Mary and her daughter to sit in the front, demanded that she drive north. Mary tried to influence the attacker, calm him down, and persuade him to let them go. She convinced him that if there were any problems, he could turn to the church, which would not abandon its parishioners in trouble. Mary stoically remained calm, trying to soothe the kidnapper and even bribing him. However, all her efforts were in vain. She even turned to the Bible, but the kidnapper was clearly not ready to listen to the Holy Scriptures. He ordered them to be quiet and keep driving. When they stopped at the nearest intersection, a patrolman pulled up next to their car. The kidnapper threatened to kill Elizabeth if they went in the same direction as the policeman or gave him a signal. Mary was forced to change their route, and the kidnapper noticeably relaxed. They drove to a wooded area in Anoka, stopping at a deserted camping site. There, the attacker ordered them out of the car and deeper into the vegetation, cautiously looking around. He forced them into the trunk, tied the mother and daughter together, taped their mouths shut. He then got behind the wheel and drove into the countryside. There, he planned to pick up a spare tire for his van, placing it in a trunk right on top of the captives. At that moment, two neighborhood boys became curious about what was happening and came dangerously close. One stood in front of the car while the other, named Jason Wilkman, approached the trunk from behind. The little boy curiously looked at the wheel and seemed to notice something underneath it. The kidnappers saw Jason and panicked. Without thinking twice, he grabbed Jason and threw him into the trunk with the others. When Jason's friends saw what had happened, he immediately ran home to tell his family. The kidnapper chased after him but was too far behind to catch up. In a panic, he jumped behind the wheel and took off. Jason was crying, and Mary tried to talk to him, but he was too scared, could only tell her his name and age. She tried to calm the children down, and it worked. At least they stopped crying. The trip was short, but Mary heard them moving around in the rough terrain. Branches and bushes constantly hit the vehicle as the criminal drove deep into the forest for several kilometers. Here, he pulled Jason out of the trunk and took him away. A few minutes later, he returned alone, did not open the trunk, but simply got behind the wheel and drove away. Mary prayed that he would just let the innocent child go because she did not hear any shots, but gloomy thoughts crept into her mind. Mary's car was left in the bushes. It was hard to see because he was increasing the distance from the police. The kidnapper got into a black van without windows, along with Mary and her daughter. Before driving off, he double-checked the ropes on his captives, then returned to the city and took them to his electronics store, where he allowed them to use the toilet and gave them juice to drink. They stretched their limbs, which had gone numb. Mary tried to find out what he wanted, but instead of answering, he taped both their mouths shut again, tied them up, put them back in the van, and drove them to his family's house in a neighboring town. The small house was only 10 kilometers from the apartment where the Stauffer lived with their children. Nevertheless, Mary and daughter did not know where they were. They were mistaken while he wandered through many places. The criminal took both of them to the bedroom of the house, which was small, dark, and cramped. He removed the door handle and locked the door. Getting used to the darkness and looking around, Mary and her daughter realized they were in a kind of storage room filled with clothes, toys, but there was nothing that could help them. At the same time, Mary's husband, Irv, and her son, Steve, were waiting for the return of the mother and daughter from the beauty salon. They had a family dinner planned, and the last preparations were to be made before leaving. Both should have returned long ago, which began to worry the household. At 4:30 p.m., Irv called the salon, and the hairdresser confirmed that the visitors had left long ago but had no idea where they were going or what could have happened. Irv called his wife's friends, but they did not know where she might be. Then he turned to other members of the Baptist community and involved them in the search. They all called local hospitals, acquaintances, police stations, and even morgues to find the missing. When no information could be obtained, Irv contacted the police. However, from the very beginning, it was obvious that they suspected of himself of the disappearance of his wife. By that night, the authorities were already engaged in the search for a 6-year-old boy, Jason Wilkman. The search for Mary continued. Irv explained that he was not involved in the disappearance of his wife and daughter. He and his son were waiting for them at home and had no idea what happened after they left the hairdresser. But the authorities did not believe him and suspected he had done something to them. The next morning, a car was found. They even managed to find 2 sets of fingerprints on the steering wheel, but their owners were not in the police database. The car had no license plate, so investigators could not determine whose car it was. The area around the car began to be thoroughly searched. First of all, they found the car's license plate. It had been torn off when the criminal escaped through the bushes. Suspicions arose that Jason's abduction and the disappearance of Mary and her child could be connected. This helped them know that the car belonged to Mary. It seemed that everything was very serious, and the missing persons were in danger. About 300 police officers and volunteers were gathered to begin the search operation. Announcements were published featuring images of the missing. Based on the words of the boy's friend, a composite sketch of the kidnapper was created. From that moment on, the authorities' suspicions regarding Mary's husband only intensified. Ironically, the composite sketch bore a striking resemblance to him. Both he and the kidnapper were dark-haired, wore glasses. Irv became the main suspect in the disappearance of the 2 children and Mary. However, Irv provided an alibi supported by a photo and passed a lie detector test. His fingerprints did not match those found in the car, yet the authorities still did not want to clear him as a suspect. Irv continued to emphasize his innocence and pointed out that the investigation's misconceptions were leading them away from the real goals of the search operation. Before her first trip to the Philippines, Mary had taught at the school, and among her 9th grade students was Ming-Sun Shiu, a teenager of Taiwanese American descent, with whom Mary had a good relationship. He showed great promise in sports and also had significant academic success. It seemed that the teenager had a great future ahead of him. Later, former students of Mary said that Ming was enamored with his math teacher. He thought she seemed smart and stately. After Mary went to the Philippines, she returned and moved to another city. Ming became truly obsessed with his teacher and constantly remembered her. He began to pursue his secret love, and it looked radical. Confusing the younger of Stauffer with his father, also named Irv, Ming showed up at Mary's in-laws house in Duluth on the 4th of July and held of Sr. at gunpoint. Ming took him into the house and told him to call his wife to the room. When Mary's mother-in-law entered, Ming realized his mistake. Ming claimed he was simply mistaken and threatened that if they went to the police, he would return and shoot them both, and then he ran away. The elderly couple had no idea that Ming was really interested in the younger Irv. They never reported it anywhere and didn't even tell the mayor and his son about the incident until they returned from the Philippines in 1979. No one had any idea who could have attacked the families. Neither the motive nor the goals were known. Mary only found out that the attack was carried out by Ming when he had already taken her and her daughter prisoner. He proudly told her about it before attacking her. Mary had no idea that he had been spying on the family from the forest, which was located not far from the house where they settled. Probably, he decided to attack because he saw preparations for departure and understood that soon they could leave again for a long time. Shortly before the kidnapping, Ming even tried to get through the doors of the patio, but nothing came of it. Later, he attempted to get through the storage room and drilled several holes. Irv found sawdust and removed it, but he still did not understand the relevance of their appearance. Now everything fell into place. In the meantime, the captives experienced the hospitality of the criminal. Immediately after the kidnapping, Ming admitted that Mary was lucky that her family was not nearby during the surprise attack, as he was ready to do anything to take her, even kill everyone. The next day after the kidnapping, he pulled Mary out of the closet, spread a blanket on the floor in the living room, tied her up. After that, he made a 3-hour video interview in which he revealed his identity. Mary remembered Ming when he spoke about math lessons at school. He reminded her that he was the student she had failed in exams. Mary immediately recalled who he was but could not understand what he meant. He told her that he couldn't get an academic scholarship because of her, as his parents had died, and he couldn't afford to go to college because of that. After losing his place in school, he was drafted into the Vietnam War, which led him to a prison camp where he experienced some tough times. He blamed Mary for all of this. Now, he wanted to make her pay. There was one flaw in this tragic story: Ming had made it all up. Mary remembered perfectly well that he graduated from high school with excellent marks, so he could easily have received a scholarship to any college. In reality, he attended the University of Minnesota and graduated from there. He never served in the army and instead immediately opened his own store. Mary realized that his story was a lie designed to impose a sense of guilt and manipulate her. In fact, Ming lived in a fictional world. He wrote fantasy stories about many women whom he abused, and after that, they begged him to be with them. Among these fantasies was his 9th grade math teacher. During a video interview, he revealed his intent not to cause physical pain but to inflict emotional trauma so that she would feel dirty, humiliated, and insulted. The footage included more than 6 hours of assaults. Over the next few days, a friend of Ming returned a borrowed camera but kept the tape of the torture. He abused Mary daily. Ming claimed he was not a pedophile. He never abused Elizabeth, nor did he force her to watch the torture of her mother, although he repeatedly threatened to do so. Unfortunately, this did not mean that Beth would remain on the sidelines of his villainous fantasies. Elizabeth turned out to be a pawn in his fictional stories. Ming demanded that Mary show love, but she refused because she was a believer and a devoted wife who had promised to love only her husband. To force she to submit, he threatened to place her daughter in a thick plastic bag and tie it shut, claiming that it would take 4 to 5 minutes for Beth to inhale all the oxygen, after which she would die. He also threatened to kill all the members of her family one by one until Mary obeyed. Mary was forced to meet him halfway. She kissed him on the cheek, feigning love, but this was not enough. Only a kiss on the lips calmed him down. Then he removed the bag from her daughter's head. Later, during a similar incident, he left Elizabeth in his van for 4 hours. This happened on a hot summer day, and in the scorching sun, the girl miraculously did not die. This experience finally convinced Mary of the need to obey him, otherwise, they would be in trouble. In the meantime, their family continued to hope that they would see both Mary and Elizabeth alive. Weeks went by, and according to statistics, the probability of the missing returning after such a long period was practically zero. After 2 weeks, the police called Irv and reported that they had found a woman's body in the forest, which was presumed to be Mary's. He provided his wife's dental records and was relieved to learn that it was not her, and therefore, there was still hope for the safe return of both his wife and daughter. Meanwhile, life in captivity continued. After some time, Ming softened the strict rules of the internal regulations. He allowed his captive to eat in the kitchen, take a shower on the 10th day, even gave Elizabeth several board games and a TV. He began to affectionately call her Betty. Despite the circumstances, this looked very unpleasant. During this period, Ming forced Mary to write 2 letters to her husband. In the first letter, she was to convince the police that she had not disappeared but had simply run away from her hated husband, whom she no longer loved. In the second letter, he voiced demands that the police stop their interference, or else no one would ever see either of them again. Ming still led a double life. He was involved in business management and worked in his electronics store as if nothing had happened. From the outside, it seemed that he was quite decent and that his life was completely ordinary. In reality, he was a kidnapper and a murderer. After 3 weeks, Ming took a rented mobile home and went with his victims to the fair in Chicago. Before that, they stopped at a shopping center in Madison, Wisconsin, to change clothes, as they had been wearing their old clothes since the abduction. Both victims were under close watch from him. He would not allow them to escape. He kept one of the two by his side, and in case of escape, he promised to kill the other. This was how he was able to grant them some relative freedom of movement, albeit within reasonable limits. Despite all of Mary's efforts to warn the police by using a receipt from her bag while shopping, the bank was notified and, unfortunately, the FBI never received the information. It apparently got lost. When Elizabeth was left unattended for a while in a shopping mall, she attempted to tell a group of teenagers that something had been stolen, but they just laughed and walked away, not believing her story. By the end of this little trip, all three even stopped by the University of Minnesota campus to watch fireworks. During this time, at least 3 police cars drove past them. However, Mary knew that the criminal had a gun with him, and she feared that he might harm them without thinking twice if she called for help. So she remained silent, despite her hopes. On July 7, 1980, Mary and Elizabeth faced serious difficulties. Ming realized that he could not remain in his house forever without being noticed. Therefore, he decided to buy a mobile home for the 3 of them, making it clear that he intended to continue this madness and wanted to eliminate any possibility of being caught. Mary understood that there might not be any other chances to escape, so she planned to wait for him to leave for work before trying to free herself. The next morning, Ming went to work as usual, and Mary began her fight for freedom. She managed to muster enough strength to remove the heavy door from its hinges, from which the captive's shackles were attached. Until that moment, they had been unable to do this. Suddenly, she heard some noise and feared that Ming had returned. Mary was instantly frightened. She acted quickly and returned everything to its original state, as if they were still tied up. They seemed to sit and listen forever until finally, they calmed down, realizing that Ming was gone. The nervous tension played a cruel joke on them, but the situation did not improve because precious time had been lost. Mary had no idea when their tormentor would return. She got to the phone and called the county sheriff's office. She was put on hold twice before finally contacting the detective who was leading the search for the 3 missing people. Thanks to a tag from a dry cleaner, she provided the address where she and her daughter live. Mary was most shocked by the policeman's question about whether Jason was with them. It was then that she realized that the child had never returned home and was probably killed in that forest during a stop. In fear of Ming's return, they simply hid in the storage room, afraid that their tormentor would soon come back. Fortunately, the police arrived before long, and the mother and daughter were freed. Both victims were photographed, having remained shackled with bicycle cables for almost 2 months. FBI agents went to Ming's shop, searches were conducted, and the criminal was arrested without resistance. A few days later, Mary went north to visit her family. Her happy release from captivity, along with her daughter, became a real sensation. However, in reality, their misadventures were not over yet. Just a few days after being incarcerated, Ming hired a killer. It turned out to be a cellmate, Richard Green, who was about to be released from prison. He asked Green to commit the murder of Mary and Elizabeth so that they could not testify against him. Additionally, Green was supposed to help Ming escape from prison in exchange for a promise of $50,000 once the job was done. As an advance, he handed over a check for $1,000. Fortunately, this plot failed, and the criminal was caught. Richard did not admit that he was hired. This was only discovered during a second interrogation and after checking the financial transactions. The prosecutor's office had more than enough evidence to build a strong case. The jury ultimately viewed a 3-hour interview that fully revealed Ming's insidious plan. The hearing was a tense moment for all involved. The mayor had to walk between the prosecution and defense tables. As soon as she asked Mary the first question, Ming jumped up and attacked the mayor. However, the prosecutor blocked his path. The guards knocked him down and immobilized him. The hearing lasted 10 days, after which Ming was found guilty of kidnapping. Difficulties arose even before the hearing began. He confessed to one of the psychiatrists who worked with him that he knew where the body of Jason Wilkman. He was then offered a plea bargain. The authorities agreed to reduce the charge to second-degree murder. In late October, Ming led the police to the boy's body. Jason had died from blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted from behind. Ultimately, Ming Sen Shiu was sentenced to life in prison but retained the possibility of parole after 30 years. Mary then had to testify again as a material witness in the trial for Jason's murder. It seemed that this terrible story was about to end. However, this time Ming was prepared for the meeting. He secretly brought a knife into the courtroom. During cross-examination, when Mary was answering questions, he jumped up from his chair, grabbed her by the neck from behind, and took her hostage, holding the blade near her throat. Fortunately, there was a policeman behind who managed to snatch the knife away and prevent the murder. As a result, Mary suffered a cut that went through her chin and the corner of her mouth, requiring 62 stitches. The second trial was postponed. As part of a plea bargain, Ming confessed to the kidnapping and second-degree murder of Jason, after which he was sentenced to 40 years in prison, with the terms of the sentences to be served concurrently. The case of this dangerous criminal was again in the spotlight. In 2010, the judge ruled that, in the case of parole, Ming Sen would be sent to undergo a state program for individuals who have committed violent abuse crimes. According to the judge, Ming met the criteria for criminals who require life imprisonment. After many hours of evaluating psychiatric reports, it was decided that he posed a permanent threat to society. For Mary, this decision came as a great relief, as Ming had openly declared to Beth, and then the entire family, that if he were ever released, he would come for them. Curiously, Ming's business was estimated by experts to be worth about $250,000. The Stauffer family filed a civil suit against him as compensation for illegal restriction of freedom and emotional distress. However, upon hearing about this, Mary declared that the right to seek justice belonged only to the Lord God, and she refused to pursue the case. After all these events, Mary repeatedly stated that despite all the evil this man caused, she continues to pray for him. Ming Sen Shiu is currently being held at the medium-security federal prison in Marion, Illinois. The ordeal of Mary Stauffer and her daughter Elizabeth stands as a chilling testament to the depths of obsession and the fragility of ordinary life. Yet, through nearly 2 months of unimaginable torment, Mary's unwavering faith and courage not only secured their escape but also illuminated a path of resilience for her family. The tragic death of Jason Wilkman and the scars left on the Stauffers underscore the devastating ripple effects of one individual's malice. Decades later, with Ming confined and deemed a perpetual danger, Mary's choice to forgive and pray for her captor reflects a profound strength that transcends vengeance. Her story endures as both a sobering warning of unchecked obsession and an inspiring reminder that even in the face of profound evil, hope, faith, and the human spirit can prevail. Perry March was born in 1961 to Arthur March and Sephora. He and his wife, Janet, were complete opposites of each other. He is ordinary, but his wife was a very bright, beautiful woman, dreamy and talented. Janet grew up in a wealthy family, as the daughter of a well-known lawyer from Nashville. Janet and Perry met as students at the University of Michigan in the early 1980s and quickly became inseparable. When Perry graduated and moved to Chicago to work as a financial broker, Janet followed him without hesitation. However, she soon began to miss her home and family. To support Perry's education, her father agreed to pay for his expensive tuition at the prestigious Vanderbilt Law School. As a result, Janet and Perry returned to Nashville, and since Perry was hesitant, it was Janet who proposed to him in Percy Warner Park. They got married in 1987 and moved into a house in a well-known area of the city, which was rented and paid for by Janet's father. The following year, Perry graduated and chose to work for a local law firm in Nashville instead of accepting offers from large firms in New York. In 1990, Janet gave birth to a son named Samson, affectionately called Sammy. On the surface, this family seemed to have everything: a mother, a father, and a son. Unfortunately, this outward appearance of happiness was deceptive. In 1991, a scandal emerged at the law firm where Perry worked after a young female specialist received an inappropriate proposal from a colleague. A stranger sent her a letter expressing his attraction to her and his desire for an intimate relationship. Feeling embarrassed, the young woman reported the incident to her boss. After this, 2 more letters arrived, urging her to respond to the proposal by leaving a message in the firm's library. In response, the firm took measures to identify the sender of these inappropriate letters. They installed a CCTV camera in the library where she was supposed to leave her reply. When the man came to collect the letter, the firm's lawyers were shocked to discover that he was Perry March, the husband of Janet. Faced with evidence from the video, Perry refused to confess. The law firm gave him an ultimatum: resign or be fired. He chose to resign. This uncomfortable situation led to legal consequences, as the female employee who received the unwanted proposal sued Perry for financial compensation. He was ordered to pay her. To avoid a harassment claim, she requested $25,000, half of which Perry was to pay in monthly installments, while the remaining $12,500 was to be paid in a lump sum. This arrangement was made to keep his wife, Janet, from discovering the scandal. In 1994, Janet and Perry welcomed their second child, a lovely daughter named Sephora. As their family grew, they decided to build a larger home and purchased nearly 2 acres in the affluent suburb of Forest Hill. Over the next year, they worked on constructing their dream house, a $650,000 mansion designed in the French country style. Janet was very enthusiastic about the project and closely oversaw every stage of the construction. However, her demands were sometimes unreasonable, leading Perry to step in and help mediate between her and the construction team. Although the new house brought excitement, Janet and Perry's marriage was facing difficulties. Their relationship had been strained for several months, and they frequently attended therapy, both together and individually. At home, they rarely communicated. Perry was often away for at least 3 days a week, and their arguments escalated whenever he returned. A family therapist suggested they take a break from each other, but Janet was adamant about getting a divorce. In August 1996, a significant incident occurred that changed the course of Janet and Perry's relationship forever. Perry needed to pay the final installment to a woman at a law firm, but, due to financial issues, he sent her a letter requesting to postpone the payment until October. Unfortunately, Janet read the letter, which led to a heated argument between them. In the aftermath, Janet contacted her mother to arrange a meeting with a divorce lawyer. On August 15, 1996, Janet was scheduled to meet with the lawyer but never arrived at the office because she mysteriously disappeared that night. Perry claimed that Janet left voluntarily after their argument. He told the police that she expressed a desire to get some space to think but did not specify where she was going. He said that at around 8:30 p.m., Janet packed a suitcase, took her passport and $1,500 in cash, and left in her car. He also mentioned that she left him a list of tasks to complete before her return. After she left, he informed friends and family of her departure as he normally would. The next morning, Deneen Beard, the maid, came to clean the house and was surprised to find everything in order. However, Perry asked her to focus on her work and not to go into the children's room. Then a nanny named Ella Goldschmidt, who had previously arranged with Janet that her son would play with Sammy, arrived. After Deneen left, Ella noticed Sammy jumping on an oriental rug that was rolled up on the floor next to the playroom. When she returned around 2 p.m. to pick up her son, the rug was no longer there. Initially, Janet's family believed Perry's explanation. Janet's father went to Nashville International Airport to check if Janet had left her car there. Janet's mother, Carolyn, became increasingly worried, as her daughter would not just vanish without a word and would never abandon her children. Although Carolyn wanted to contact the police, Perry convinced her to wait 12 days, claiming that Janet had said she would return by then. That evening, Perry called his father, Arthur, a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel living in Jalisco, Mexico. Arthur readily agreed to travel to Nashville to support his son during this challenging time. In the meantime, Janet's family's concerns continued to escalate. With August 25 being Sammy's 6th birthday, fears grew that something had happened to Janet. She would definitely not miss such an important occasion. While Perry and Janet's parents told the party guests she had traveled to California to visit her brother and was postponing her return due to an ear infection, her sudden disappearance raised alarm among her loved ones. Days passed without any news from Janet, and the anxious waiting could not go on much longer. On August 29th, Janet's parents reported her missing to the police. Detective David Miller, a skilled investigator with extensive experience, was assigned to the case. He initiated the investigation by reaching out to hospitals and reviewing Janet's bank and credit card accounts, which had not been used since her disappearance, raising concerns about her well-being. On September 7th, authorities located Janet's car in a parking lot at an apartment complex about 5 miles from her home. The car appeared to have been parked there for several weeks. Inside, police discovered Janet's bag, which contained her documents, passport, credit cards, and $11 in cash. They also found a suitcase filled with clothes, notably absent of a bra, toothpaste, a comb, or underwear, which seemed unusual. Additional evidence included a pair of white sandals in the glove compartment and unusual, dirty bicycle tire tracks near the car. Investigators needed to analyze this evidence carefully. On September 10, 1996, Perry was questioned by investigators and consented to a search of his home. The police conducted the search over the weekend of September 14th to 15th while Perry was away in Chicago with his children. The house showed no signs of domestic violence or anything noteworthy. A few days later, the owner of a tire store contacted law enforcement to inform them that Perry had visited the store on August 21st, a week after Janet went missing. Perry inquired about purchasing a new set of tires, despite the good condition of those already on his car. When asked why he wanted a different brand, his response raised further suspicions. On September 18th, Perry decided to move to Chicago with his children. Before leaving, he had a concerning conversation with Janet's longtime friend, Diane Sachs, which she later reported to the police. Perry asked Diane if she thought he could kill his wife. Although she hesitated to answer, he proceeded to ask the disturbing question of what she would think if he had loaded Janet's body into his car and taken it to a remote location for disposal. This raised serious suspicions about him. As a result, the police launched a comprehensive search for Janet, involving divers, 2 helicopters with thermal scanners, specially trained dogs, police officers, and volunteers. Meanwhile, Perry hired a lawyer, who informed the police that Perry would not cooperate with the investigation. In November, as Janet's parents held a day of mourning for her, Perry chose not to attend, further increasing the police's suspicions about him. Over time, a theory about Janet's disappearance began to develop. It was suggested that Perry and Janet had a heated argument the night she disappeared. During this argument, Janet may have said something that provoked Perry, leading him to strike her hard. Given that Perry held a black belt in martial arts, a single blow could have killed her, or he might have strangled her. Whether intentional or not, when he found Janet dead at his feet, he was faced with a dire decision. Investigators believe that Perry hid Janet's body either in the basement, in the woods, or near their home. Furthermore, Ella had mentioned that there was a rolled-up rug that she had noticed in Perry's house that morning. Janet's body may have been inside that carpet, and tragically, little Sammy may have unknowingly played around his mother's body. Afterward, Perry moved her body to his Jeep and drove to a location where he buried it. He then drove Janet's car to where it was later discovered, taking her mountain bike with him so he could ride it back home. However, these are merely speculations, and the police were tasked with uncovering evidence of the murder, marking a new phase in the investigation. Janet's father, a prominent lawyer, was determined to uncover the truth about his daughter's disappearance. Meanwhile, Perry applied to become the manager of Janet's estate, but her parents opposed this and filed their own petition. Perry refused to consent. Ultimately, the court designated a guardian to oversee Janet's property and ordered Perry to return some items he had taken. He only returned them after being urged to do so. This was just the beginning of a legal dispute between Perry and Janet's parents. The battle continued until late 1999 when the court granted Janet's parents the right to visit their grandchildren. They traveled to Perry's new home in Illinois, eager to see the children, but were shocked to discover that he had moved to Mexico to be with his father. Moreover, just weeks after relocating, Perry married a local woman named Carmen Rojas. 3 years had passed since Janet went missing, and she still had not been officially declared dead. This prompted her parents to file a lawsuit against Perry for the manslaughter of their daughter. When Perry did not appear in court to contest the charges against him, the judge ordered him to pay $113.5 million in compensation to Janet's parents in May 2000. Janet's parents traveled back to Mexico to confront Perry and requested to meet his children. He firmly refused their request, prompting them to return to Nashville. A month later, they returned to Mexico with a court order and assistance from local police, who arrested Perry for violating his visa. Although the charges were eventually dropped, by the time Perry got back home, his children were missing. Taking advantage of Perry's absence, Janet's parents took the children to the U.S. and sought permanent custody once they were home. This led to a direct confrontation and sparked another legal battle for custody. Ultimately, Perry regained custody, and Janet's parents were reprimanded for unlawfully taking the children. Later, the Tennessee Court of Appeals overturned Perry's manslaughter conviction. At this point, Perry believed he could lead a stable life in Mexico with his new wife and children, feeling confident that nothing would disrupt his plans. However, unexpected developments were on the horizon, as the local police department, along with 2 investigators, continued to actively investigate Janet's case. In the latter half of 2004, the prosecutor's office introduced new evidence that led to a retrial, during which 59 witnesses were heard. This resulted in charges against Perry for second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. In October 2005, an arrest warrant and a request for extradition to the United States were issued for Perry. While being transported, Perry was accompanied by Pat Postiglione, one of the detectives involved in the investigation. During the journey, Perry was quite talkative and asked the detective whether he could face murder charges if an accident occurred. He also told Pat that he would be willing to confess everything if he could receive a sentence of no more than 7 years. The detective stated that he would pass this information on to the district attorney. Janet's parents were determined not to allow Perry to enjoy a new life after spending a short time in prison. They submitted a new petition for custody of the children, which the judge approved. Facing difficulties in the legal system, Perry sought another solution. He attempted to persuade his cellmate, Russell Ferris, to kill Janet's parents. Russell became interested in the plan and learned that Perry's father, Arthur, would act as the intermediary. After 2 months of discussions among the three, Russell's lawyer notified the police about Perry's offer to kill Janet's parents. From that point on, Perry's situation became increasingly complicated. Initially, the evidence against Perry for murder was weak and mostly circumstantial. His lawyer argued that there was no solid proof that Perry had committed the crime. If he had been found not guilty, he could not be tried again for the same offense. However, the situation changed dramatically with the discovery of a murder-for-hire plot involving Janet's parents. Now, the police had recorded conversations revealing details of the planned murder, including statements made by both Perry and his father, Arthur. When Arthur listened to the recordings, he realized his errors and agreed to testify against his son in exchange for a more lenient sentence. The disturbing truth emerged. Arthur, Perry's father, revealed that his son had confessed to him about killing Janet. A few weeks after the murder, Perry sought his father's help because he was anxious about the body being discovered. He asked Arthur to help hide it. One night, they drove to a location where, according to Arthur, the body was already decomposing and stored in a bag. Arthur recounted loading the remains into Perry's Jeep. They then traveled north to Bowling Green, Kentucky, where they stayed at a motel. Under the cover of darkness, Arthur attempted to dispose of the body. He looked for a body of water deep enough to conceal the remains but was unable to find one before sunrise. Eventually, he located a suitable spot. Arthur later attempted to guide investigators to the location where he had hidden the body, but he couldn't specify the exact spot. However, both the police and the jury believed his account of the incident. According to Arthur, after Perry killed Janet, Her body remained in their home for some time, wrapped in a rug. Unfortunately for Arthur, his confession did not yield the leniency he had hoped for, and he died just months later while incarcerated. Perry faced a much harsher fate. He was convicted of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder, resulting in a 56-year prison sentence. He is currently incarcerated at the Morgan County Correctional Complex, where he assists fellow inmates with their legal appeals in the prison law library. He will be eligible for parole in 2038. Tragically, Janet's remains have never been found. Let's head over to the small, quiet town of Malang in North Cotabato, Philippines. It's a place known for its calm vibe and rural charm, where life moves at a slower pace. The people here are deeply connected to the land, relying on agriculture for their livelihood. In this peaceful town lived the Magwad family. Unlike many others, they led a pretty stable life. Cruz Magwad, the father, was an elementary school teacher who was well respected and loved by everyone, often being praised for his hard work. His wife, Lovella, was the principal at the same school. Together, while they didn't make a lot of money, they were considered one of the more privileged families in town. Their youngest child, Criziel Lewis, was 16 years old. He dreamed of becoming a lawyer even at such a young age and was determined to work hard to achieve that goal. Besides being intelligent, he was also creative, playing guitar, drawing, and reading in his spare time. His older sister, Criziel Gwyn, was the more intense one, super smart, driven, and goal-oriented. She had always been that way as a kid, being a Girl Scout with a sash covered in so many badges that there was no room for more. Gwyn didn't stop there. She enrolled in a pre-med program during high school and planned to become a doctor. By all accounts, Gwyn was the type of person who would sit with you at a party if you were feeling shy, sticking by your side until you felt at ease. That's how she met 17-year-old Janice Sebiel. However, unlike Gwyn and Lewis, Janice's childhood was far from happy. She wasn't privileged enough to attend school and had to work from a very young age. Even worse, she grew up without parents. Her first real memories began around the age of 8. Before that, everything was a blur. She only recalls being found by a stranger wandering alone on a huge shipping container boat. Her parents were nowhere to be found, and Janice believed they had abandoned her. A stranger was kind enough to post her picture and name online in an attempt to find her parents. They shared her story on Facebook and various online forums, but no one ever came forward. Eventually, Janice was dropped off at the Philippine version of Child Protective Services, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, where she moved from one foster home to another. Not long after, Janice was offered a live-in nanny job by a family. Though she hated the job, she was incredibly grateful for the opportunity. Janice shared all of this with Gwyn, and Gwyn was so deeply moved by her story that an idea began to form in her mind, an idea that could give Janice the safe, loving home she deserved: adoption. Together with Lewis, Gwyn decided to present this idea to their parents. Like a well-thought-out thesis, they approached the subject with serious dedication, explaining that adopting Janice wouldn't just change her life, it would help their family too. They convinced their parents that Janice could pitch in with the chores around the house, which was a significant consideration in their Asian family culture. It wasn't uncommon for children to share the responsibility of washing dishes, cleaning, and cooking. With one more set of hands to help, the family would run more smoothly. Gwyn's parents weren't exactly rolling in money, but they believed in teaching responsibility. The kids had chores, had to keep their grades up, and attended church every Sunday. They were strict, but it was out of love. Gwyn and Lewis respected that. In 2021, Janice moved in, and it was like she was instantly part of the family. The Magwad welcomed her with open arms. Lewis even gave up his own room so Janice could have a more comfortable one. They enrolled her in school right away, and for the first time, Janice didn't have to wake up with the constant worry of finding food or going to work. She was finally allowed to be a kid. As Janice settled into her new life, the bond between the three siblings grew stronger by the day. We could see the happiness shining through, especially in the videos they posted on TikTok. Janice even got to experience a family vacation for the first time, something she had always dreamed of. Laughter filled the air as they explored new places together, creating memories she would cherish forever. For once, Janice felt like she belonged to something bigger, something safe and full of love. But just when everything seemed perfect, Janice's world was about to shatter. On December 10th of that same year, she posted a series of statuses on Facebook claiming that she and her siblings were under attack. It was just days before Christmas, a time that should have been filled with joy. Instead, it marked the beginning of a nightmare. At that time, Mr. Cruz, their father, was at school doing some chores related to the upcoming holiday, while Lovella, their mother, was away on a work trip. Everything changed when Mr. Cruz received a phone call that left him frozen in terror. The voice on the other end told him that their home was being ransacked, and his children were inside. By 3:15 in the afternoon, Cruz finally arrived at the house. It was eerily silent outside the front door. His eyes locked onto a blood-soaked blanket on the ground with a knife nearby. He called out for his kids, but there was no response. He moved quickly to the back door and managed to find a way inside. Cruz moved rapidly through the house, his voice echoing off the walls as he searched for his children. When he entered the living room, that a horrifying sight met his eyes. There, lying on the floor, was his daughter Gwen. A towel soaked in blood was wrapped around her body, her limbs and torso were covered in multiple slash wounds. But it was the injuries on her neck that were particularly severe. Crime scene photos later revealed the gruesome extent of the wounds. Her flesh was torn apart, and ants had already begun to gather on her body. Not far from Gwen, near the main door, Cruz found Louis. His hands and feet were bound, and a gag covered his mouth. His body was riddled with fresh stab wounds, and the amount of blood suggested that the attack had happened just moments before Cruz arrived. But there was one more person missing. Janice's heart pounded as Cruz continued to search the house, calling her name. Finally, Janice appeared. She emerged from her room, her hair wet and her face pale and shaken. She was in shock, barely able to speak. Seeing her, Cruz immediately called the police. The officers arrived soon after, stepping into a crime scene that would later be described as one of the most gruesome in the Philippines. Blood pooled on the floor, and the house bore the marks of extreme violence. Janice, while trembling, told the officers that they had been attacked. The house was in disarray, cabinets had been pried open and personal belongings were scattered across the rooms. At first glance, it seemed like a robbery. However, investigators knew that appearances could be deceiving. They needed to confirm whether anything valuable had been taken to solidify the robbery theory. At the same time, as part of their protocol, the police did not rule out the parents as persons of interest. The police needed to confirm their alibis and whereabouts during the attack. The investigators turned their attention to the room where Janice said she was hiding during the attack. It was messy, but that wasn't unusual for a robbery scene. What stood out, though, were the details that didn't add up. The disarray in the room, though chaotic, didn't have the usual signs of a real robbery. So the police began to search the house more carefully, and they soon found some crucial evidence just outside the front door. The police discovered a blood-stained shirt, which they believed had been dropped by the attacker while trying to escape. About 100 meters away, they found a plastic bag in a ditch. Inside were bloody pants and underwear. It seemed the attacker had deliberately discarded these items to hide evidence. Inside the house, the scene became increasingly horrifying. The living room floor was littered with shards of glass and broken bottles, a clear sign of the violence that had unfolded there. Expansive pools of blood reveal the brutal nature of the attack. Among the carnage, investigators discovered a discarded knife, a baseball bat, and a hammer, each stained with blood. These weapons were assumed to have been used in the murders. Crime scene analysts took careful note of the blood patterns, which provided key insights into the sequence of events. They determined that Gwen, the older sibling, had likely been killed first. Her blood had partially coagulated and rigor mortis had already begun to set in. In contrast, Louis's blood appeared much fresher, suggesting he had been murdered after Gwen. The different states of the blood and bodies made this theory even more plausible. Lewis's hands and feet were bound, while Gwyn's were not. This discrepancy indicated that Gwyn might have been ambushed and killed quickly, while Lewis was restrained, likely to prevent him from resisting before his own murder. The fact that so many different tools were used and that the victims had distinctive types of wounds strongly suggested the involvement of more than one attacker. This theory was supported by the fact that Lewis had been restrained. It would have been difficult for a single person to control a victim while also carrying out such a brutal attack. Adding to the mystery, crews confirmed that the weapons found at the scene were his. The murderers seemed to have used tools that were readily available in the house, which made the crime even more unsettling. As investigators continued to gather evidence, they found something that stood out. The family's laundry machine had been used, but there were no freshly washed clothes anywhere in the house. This odd discovery suggested that something unusual had happened after the crime, perhaps an attempt to erase evidence or cover their tracks. The extreme brutality of the crime prompted local authorities to launch a manhunt for the suspects. The public was shocked, and the need for justice became urgent. To help with the investigation, the vice of the Municipal Council of Mlang, North Cotabato announced a reward of 200,000 pesos for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. The mayor also offered an additional 50,000 pesos as a bounty. These actions emphasized the gravity of the case and the community's desperate need for answers. Autopsies were performed on Gwyn and Lewis over 2 days, starting on December 13, 2021, and the results were chilling. Gwyn had sustained 32 stab and slash wounds, some of which were deep enough to almost sever her limbs. One of her ears had been cut off, and her neck and upper arm were nearly severed. Her body also showed signs of blunt force trauma, likely caused by the hammer and baseball bat found at the scene. Additionally, the backs of her hands were bruised, covered in defensive wounds, indicating that she had fought fiercely. Meanwhile, Lewis had endured 51 knife wounds, some so deep that they exposed his bones and internal organs. Red marks on his neck suggested he may have been strangled. Unlike his sister, Lewis had no defensive wounds. He also had signs of blunt force trauma on his limbs and torso. All these injuries were consistent with the weapons recovered at the scene. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. Though the rooms appeared ransacked, only Gwyn's phone was missing. Nothing else of value had been taken, leading authorities to believe that the killer or killers were familiar with the victims. It was also striking that the crime took place in broad daylight, which made the entire situation even more unsettling. Before the autopsy results were made public, rumors began circulating online accusing Janice of being involved in the crime. These rumors gained traction due to her survival, the weapons being from the family home, and the locked front door. The accusations grew increasingly intense, with some even threatening Janice. Under the mounting pressure, the police decided to question her. Janice described the events of that day. She had been studying with Gwyn in her bedroom while Lewis was downstairs in the living room. Suddenly, they heard screams, and 3 men broke into the house. The 2 girls rushed downstairs and saw the 3 men attacking Lewis with the weapons found at the scene. The attackers then turned on Gwyn. In fear, Janice fled upstairs, locked herself in her bedroom, and hid under the bed. Janice was too scared to call the police, so instead, she texted the family group chat asking for help. Later, she messaged her adoptive mom saying, "Mom, help." When no one saw those messages, Janice went a step further and posted on social media, saying, "Help. Somebody has broken into the house. I don't want to die. I'm hiding in my room. Help." After a few minutes, she deleted the post, worried the attackers might see it and come after her. By the time someone saw the post and reached out to her mom, Janice was too scared to pick up. She even changed her social media username and put her phone on silent, clearly trying to hide. When the house finally fell silent, Janice emerged from her hiding place, too afraid to go downstairs. She claimed she took a shower and changed clothes to calm herself, finishing just as crews arrived home. However, there was something odd about this part of the story. Janice had told the police she locked herself in her bedroom the moment the attack began, So why did her room look like it had been ransacked? That raised serious questions. More importantly, Janice's version of events was directly at odds with the forensic evidence. The autopsy results and the way the injuries were distributed made it clear that Gwyn was the first victim, not Lewis. This major discrepancy between Janice's account and the evidence made investigators even more suspicious. Something wasn't adding up, and they started to take a closer look at Janice's statements. At first, she told the police her phone was off during the attack, but Cruz remembered calling her phone and hearing it ring with no answer. When Janice was confronted with this, she changed her story again, now claiming that she had been in the shower and hadn't heard her phone ringing. This was starting to sound suspicious. But that wasn't the only thing that raised eyebrows. Cruz also revealed some information about the murder weapons that added fuel to the fire. The baseball bat used in the attack originally belonged to Lewis. He had kept it in his room on the top bunk as a kind of protection. However, after being adopted by Cruz, Janice had taken over the top bunk. The hammer used in the attack was another tool that Cruz kept around for home repairs. He was very careful about where he stored it, usually hiding it behind the washing machine. Cruz mentioned that only 3 people knew exactly where that hammer was: himself, Gwyn, and Janice. This meant that the killer or killers had to have known the family's routines and possessions very well, almost as if they had been living in the house with them. Things became even more suspicious when a delivery driver came forward. The driver had arrived at the house just 18 minutes before Cruz was contacted by a neighbor who noticed that no one had answered the door. The driver kept calling out, hoping someone would respond. Eventually, he noticed a woman peering at him through a door before she suddenly walked away. The woman's identity was never confirmed, but it raised serious doubts about where Janice was and what she was doing during the attack. At the crime scene, it had been locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. This was significant because it meant that whoever had done this was likely someone familiar with the house, someone who had access to a key and could lock the door after the crime. At this point, it was pretty clear that Janice had something to do with the murders. However, since Janice was only 17 years old, still a minor. Under Philippine law, the police couldn't arrest her without solid proof. This legal issue made them tread carefully, as they couldn't move forward with an arrest until they had more definitive evidence. Rather than arresting her immediately, the authorities placed Janice under the care of the Social Welfare Department while they investigated who had actually committed the murders. If Janice's claim about other people being involved was true, the police had a considerable amount of work ahead of them. 5 days after the murders, a significant breakthrough occurred. The police discovered Janice's fingerprints on the murder weapons. This was a huge deal, but it wasn't the smoking gun. After all, Janice had lived in the house where the weapons were stored, so her prints could have been there simply from handling them. Still, it was a lead they couldn't ignore. To ensure she wasn't treated unfairly, Janice was given a lawyer by the Social Welfare Department. However, things took another unexpected turn when Lovella, Janice's adoptive mother, found a contact tracing form while searching Janice's room for clues. To her surprise, it wasn't Janice's form. It belonged to a 17-year-old boy named Esmeraldo Aldo Cano Jr. Aldo was a sacristan at a local church, and Janice had known him from the orphanage. This discovery sent the police scrambling to determine if Aldo had anything to do with the murders. Soon enough, witnesses came forward confirming that Aldo had been near the crime scene on the day of the killings. One woman stated she saw Aldo drop Janice off near the house right before the murders, and another neighbor said she saw him asking for directions to the house that morning. When shown a picture of Aldo, the woman immediately recognized him. Then, on December 16th, 6 days after the murder, Janice, with her lawyer present, gave a full confession. She admitted to being involved in the murders along with Aldo. Janice explained that her motives stemmed from deep resentment and jealousy. She felt that Gwyn and Lewis were receiving all the love and attention from their parents. In her mind, they were standing in the way of her getting the affection she had longed for. She even confessed that killing them would leave her as the only child in the family, guaranteeing that she would get all the love and attention she had recently started receiving after being adopted. Janice revealed that her ultimate goal was to take Gwyn's place in the family, driven by years of emotional neglect in the orphanage where she had grown up. By December 18th, Janice's confession was officially recorded, although it was inconsistent, much like many of her previous statements. The police tracked down Aldo, who voluntarily surrendered, admitting his role as well. Forensic analysis later confirmed that blood found on discarded clothing in a ditch belonged to Aldo. Like Janice, Aldo was also a minor, so he was placed under the care of the Social Welfare Department. Later that same day, in an unrelated banned substance raid, police arrested a 17-year-old for possession of illegal substances. When they searched his phone, they found something that tied him to the case: Gwyn's stolen cell phone. The serial number confirmed it had been taken after the murders. The police pieced it together. Janice had enlisted Aldo to sell the phone because she couldn't get rid of it herself. Unfortunately, the phone had been damaged, making it impossible to retrieve any useful data. The boy who had the phone wasn't involved in the murders, he had simply bought it from Aldo. Because Janice and Aldo were minors, the police couldn't release any juicy details about their confessions to the public, despite the parents pressing for information. As the investigation progressed, Janice stopped cooperating, making it even harder to figure out exactly what had happened. Some people believe Janice's confessions weren't even the full story. Whispers circulated that the murders were even worse than she had let on, like the possibility that Louis was tied up and forced to watch as his sister was murdered before he was killed as well. After the shocking confessions, Lovella, the siblings' mother, was interviewed and reflected on the warning signs she had missed. According to Lovella, they had adopted Janice 5 months before the murders. At first, everything seemed fine, the family welcomed her, and she appeared grateful. However, soon small red flags began to show. In August 2021, when Gwyn's parents were hospitalized, Cruz noticed that 10,000 pesos, about $170, set aside for emergencies was missing. Janice claimed thieves had taken it, but the next day a large sum was found hidden in her school bag. After some questioning, Janice admitted she had taken the money. Despite this breach of trust, the family, particularly Gwyn, chose to forgive her. They were sympathetic to her troubled past, attributing the theft to the survival instinct she had developed after years of hardship. Janice apologized, and the family, hoping this was a one-time mistake. They accepted her apology, believing the worst was behind them. However, as months passed, Janice's behavior started to shift in unsettling ways. She became lazy, irresponsible, neglecting household chores and showing a disregard for reminders. She apologized but never followed through. Although troubling, it didn't raise any immediate alarms until the morning of the murders. On that day, Janice did something she had never done before. She called Cruz and Lovella mom and dad for the first time. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a red flag, indicating a deeper, darker shift in her emotional state. It was as if something had clicked in her mind, setting in motion what was about to happen. As the investigation unfolded, more shocking truths came to light. Janice had lied about her origins from the start. Her story of being an orphan was a fabrication. Her parents were alive and had spent years desperately searching for her. When the case went viral, Filipino amateur sleuths dug into her past and uncovered a nearly decade-old missing persons notice. Her parents weren't very active on Facebook back then, so they missed the post. Fast forward to the murders, and that same post started circulating online again. It didn't take long for Janice's biological parents to recognize her. Born in 2005, Janice was the youngest of 3 children, but her childhood was filled with chaos. Her father's gambling addiction tore the family apart, and after remarrying, her mother tried to make the best of the situation by dividing what little they had left among her children. Eventually, Janice and her siblings were placed in different orphanages. By 2020, Janice had actually reunited with her biological family, but that reunion didn't last long. Her relatives later claimed she cut them off, saying they were too poor to be of any use to her. This betrayal shocked everyone. Things took a darker turn when Janice's biological mother, devastated by what her daughter had done, attended the funeral of Gwyn and Louis. In her grief, she kept apologizing, overwhelmed with guilt about her daughter's actions. In one heartbreaking moment, Janice's biological mother even knelt down, but the Magwad weren't seeking revenge. They made it clear that they weren't angry, only seeking justice. They insisted that Janice's biological mother encourage her daughter to confess. Janice's mother tried to visit Janice at the social welfare office, but Janice refused to see her, citing strict rules. Then, the investigation took a jaw-dropping turn when evidence surfaced suggesting the murders were premeditated. Screenshots of a conversation between Janice and an unknown person went viral. In the messages, Janice confessed that she wanted to kill her siblings, thinking their deaths would give her the freedom she craved. She even wondered if anyone would still accept her if she committed murder, expressing a chilling belief that no matter what she did, God would forgive her if she asked. Some sources claim that Janice often talked about the 2009 horror movie The Orphan, a film about a young girl adopted by a family who ultimately betrays and kills them. She even posted on Facebook that she loved the movie and watched it repeatedly. When Janice's trial began, her behavior was just as disturbing. She was seen smiling and laughing in court, showing no remorse or regret. Cruz and Lovella, devastated by the loss of their children, said in interviews that they might have forgiven Janice if she had shown even a hint of genuine remorse, but her coldness only deepened their pain. The case became a national sensation in the Philippines. From March 2022, when Janice and Esmeralda were officially charged with murder, to their conviction on May 17, 2022, the case was closely followed by the public. Janice Sibiel was sentenced to 31 years in prison, while Esmeralda Aldo Cano Jr. received a 29-year sentence. However, both sentences came with one condition: they would serve them under the supervision of the Department of Social Welfare and Development until their 21st birthdays, after which they would be transferred to adult prisons. Gwyn and Lewis's parents had mixed feelings about the trial's outcome. While they recognized that the courts handed down the toughest punishment possible under the law, they felt the laws were too soft. The biggest issue, however, was Janice's complete lack of remorse. Cruz and Lovella were outspoken against Republic Act 9344, which limits the legal accountability of minors. According to this law, the minimum age for criminal liability is 15, and individuals between the ages of 15 and 18 can be held accountable but are sent to youth centers or rehab programs instead of adult prisons. This law prevents minors like Janice from being tried as adults, even for heinous crimes. Many argued that kids shouldn't be capable of planning or committing such brutal acts. In the US and other countries, minors committing these kinds of crimes would have been tried as adults. Cruz and Lovella felt strongly that Janice's age shouldn't excuse her from taking full responsibility, especially for such a violent and premeditated crime. This view was shared by many who felt the law was too lenient in cases like this. They publicly called for changes to the law, wanting those who commit violent acts at a young age to be held fully accountable. Some of the most heartbreaking facts to come out of the investigation revealed that Gwyn almost escaped. She had the chance to run, but when she heard Lewis calling for help, she went back, hoping to save her brother. At around 4 p.m. on Friday, April 15, 2011, in Lorgues, France, 27-year-old Alexander Durand was on his way home when he received a call from his younger sister, Séverine. She was a high school student, and the siblings had a close relationship, often calling each other. However, today she called not to share good news or weekend plans. Instead, she informed him that their mother, Colette, had not picked her up after school as she usually did. The day before, Séverine had been with their father, who had taken her to school in the morning. She had tried calling their mother multiple times, but her calls went unanswered. This was unusual because their mother was normally very responsible, and there was no reason for her not to come and pick up her daughter. Séverine was worried that something might have happened, such as an accident. She advised Alexander to check the situation and visit their mother's house. Alexander was also worried, so he called his mother several times, but received no response. Finally, he decided to visit his mother's house himself. When Alexander arrived, Séverine was already there, but she was still very anxious, even more than before. She was in the house with the gendarmes, and what they discovered was very concerning. Colette's car was parked in the driveway, the doors were unlocked, and the keys were in the ignition. 52-year-old Colette had vanished without a trace. The keys to the house were also in the car, so Alexander took them and went inside to see what was happening. The house was completely empty, as if she had simply disappeared. The gendarmes quickly began their search for Colette since the situation was becoming increasingly alarming. Initially, they suspected a robbery, but they found that nothing was stolen from the house. The doors and windows were untouched. In the back seat of the car, they discovered Colette's purse, which held all her identification, bank cards, and cash. She could not have left willingly without those items. Tension heightened. Even after 3 hours of searching, there was still no news. Both the house and the car were thoroughly examined, but no leads emerged. As a result, the search area was expanded to include the outskirts of the town. None of the neighbors had seen anything out of the ordinary, no suspicious noises or activity near Colette's home. To learn more about her, the police interviewed her relatives. Colette, a divorced mother of 4, was known for her reserved and calm demeanor. She was not someone who would spontaneously disappear. She had no mental health issues or addictions. At the time, Colette was working as a supermarket manager. She was polite, punctual, and a devoted mother. Everyone who knew her was confused and did not understand what had happened, as she had no troubling relationships and no history of violence. The evidence suggested that Colette's disappearance was not accidental. The police believed that whoever was involved in this incident was someone she was very familiar with. At the very least, Colette had allowed this person into her house or had given them the right to enter. After investigating, the police identified the primary suspect. She lived by herself in a small 2-story house. To save on expenses, she rented the first floor to a man named Bernard. During his interview, Bernard made some strange and unsettling remarks. He speculated on how Colette might have been abducted, suggesting that she could have been struck on the back of the head, rendering her unable to call for help. He also provided a detailed account of her medical condition, noting that she was diabetic and needed urgent assistance to avoid serious health consequences. His level of knowledge about Colette raised suspicions among the police. Furthermore, Colette's son, Alexander, revealed that Bernard was in love with his mother, which could explain his insight into her behavior and routines. This revelation increased suspicions, as Bernard could potentially have a motive. Alexander noted that, despite Bernard's interest, his mother did not reciprocate and had no intention of developing anything beyond friendship. She was solely focused on her children and her work, completely dismissing the idea of a romantic relationship with Bernard. When detectives investigated Bernard's background, they found that he had a criminal history. In 1999, he assaulted his girlfriend with a weapon after she tried to end their relationship. His ex described him as very hot-tempered and unable to control his rage. As a result of these incidents, suspicions about Bernard increased. Colette's lack of interest may have caused him to become angry, and what happened next remains unclear. In 1999, Bernard received a brief 6-year prison sentence for an attack, mainly because the girl he attacked survived. Now, he was called to the police station for questioning as the primary suspect in Colette's disappearance. The police were trying to determine when Colette went missing, and Bernard claimed to have useful information. He reported that on the afternoon of April 14, 2011, while watching television, he heard noises coming from the 2nd floor, where Colette had lived. He could hear footsteps on the wooden floor, but then everything went quiet. He did not see Colette leave, making it likely that he was the last person to have seen her. However, the police were concerned about Bernard's behavior. He was unable to recall the exact time of the noises or even remember what show he was watching, raising further suspicions. Bernard's main problem was that he didn't have a verifiable alibi. However, there was no evidence against him, so the police had to let him go. The next morning, officers came to inspect his house. Bernard greeted them with shouts and was initially unwilling to let them enter. Eventually, he agreed to show them around the 1st floor of the rented property but continued to make odd comments. Notably, he pointed out a hatch that led to the basement. He remarked that if he had killed someone, he would have hidden the body there, yet he insisted he was innocent and claimed the basement was empty. Upon inspection, there was indeed no one there. Meanwhile, when law enforcement searched Colette's home, they discovered suspicious stains believed to be washed blood, but this could not be confirmed. Despite the lack of evidence, suspicion remained around Bernard. Deciding to keep a close watch on him, the detectives sought to establish the exact time of Colette's disappearance, but clues were scarce. She had been alone for several days with minimal contact with her neighbor until April 15th. Anything could have happened during that time. Investigators began to piece together her movements, partly based on Bernard's statement that he had heard loud noises from the floor above on April 14th, the day before she vanished. As the investigators looked into the case, they realized that no one had seen Colette since April 15th. They managed to locate her friend, who stated that he had last seen Colette on April 14th around 3:30 p.m. at a gathering with mutual friends. He mentioned that after leaving the party, she got into her car intending to drive to Draguignan but planned to stop at home first. This was the only information available and was considered a starting point for the investigation, as more than 40 hours had passed since she went missing. Communicating with Colette's friend helped them determine a rough timeline for when she went missing. In her car, investigators found not only her personal belongings but also her mobile phone. They began analyzing the phone to see whom Colette had communicated with in the hours leading up to her disappearance. Notably, there was a call that lasted about 40 seconds, made shortly before 3:30 p.m. The call was from Sylviane Fabre, Colette's ex-husband's sister. Sylviane was contacted, and she stated that she had met Colette during Colette's marriage to her brother. At that time, Colette's relationship with her husband was not very good, so they decided to separate. However, afterward, the former spouses and their families managed to maintain friendly relations. Sylviane mentioned that back in 2008, they collaborated with Colette to invest money in a joint business. Shortly before Colette's disappearance, the business partners had a small conflict regarding these assets, but Sylviane claimed that everything was resolved, and they continued to work together. Together, Sylviane and Colette created a real estate company that generated a substantial income, which provided Sylviane with a potential motive. Not only were they distant relatives, but they also had shared finances and property, which can often lead to such conflicts. Naturally, Sylviane denied any wrongdoing. Colette's daughter mentioned that Sylviane often had conflicts regarding their joint activities. They could argue and reconcile several times a day. However, Colette's daughter described all these disputes as minor issues that were resolved quickly. The gendarmes checked Sylviane's schedule for the last few days. She had an alibi confirmed by her son. For almost the entire duration of the investigation, suspicions against Sylviane were not substantiated, and the search operation again hit a dead end. On April 17, 2011, the prosecutor's office began a judicial investigation into the disappearance of Colette. With no leads left and all suspicious individuals cleared as unlikely suspects, there was no option but to notify the media and hope, with their assistance, to obtain new witnesses who might have noticed something. At a recent press conference, officials announced that while there were priority leads in the criminal investigation, no suspects had been identified. This news sparked significant interest among journalists, as the case could potentially involve themes of business, money, love, or betrayal. Consequently, rumors began circulating about Colette immediately, some of which were quite alarming. Her information, background, and photos quickly became prominent in newspapers and on television. Her children expressed their desire to see her again and shared how difficult her absence was for them. The most concerning aspect was that the critical 48-hour window for finding her alive had already passed, significantly diminishing the chances of a successful rescue. While the prosecutor's office hoped to gather new leads from the public through the media, the police were actively searching the nearby villages. Following the press conference, the search area was widened, and a special investigative unit took over the case. Colette's disappearance began to attract national attention. The media frenzy intensified as they attempted to connect her case with another notorious crime that had recently shaken France. A few days before Colette went missing in early April 2011, 5 members of the Dupont de Ligonnès family, including the wife and 4 children, were found murdered under the terrace of their home in Nantes. The head of the family, Xavier, disappeared shortly after the murders, having been spotted on the outskirts of the city on April 15. Authorities believe Xavier was responsible for the crime, and he was placed on a nationwide wanted list. Notably, the location of the massacre was only 30 kilometers from Colette's home. The media quickly linked these incidents together. The timing coincided with Colette's likely disappearance, raising the possibility that Xavier kidnapped her. An even stranger coincidence was that the Dupont de Ligonnès family lived in a house that Colette had sold in 1992. Xavier was viewed as a respectable citizen, a devoted husband, and a caring father who was engaged in his community and known for his honesty and fairness. However, it later emerged that Xavier was deep in debt at the time he murdered his family. Just days before the killings, he purchased cement, tools, and 4 bags of lime, suggesting he had a motive and was preparing for the crime. Journalists speculated that Xavier may have had a grudge against Colette, but the reason for his potential revenge remained unclear. Rumors spread quickly, with theories ranging from a fraudulent real estate deal to unrequited love. Others suspected it could be part of a planned escape. Xavier could have taken Colette so they could be together again. Witnesses came forward, claiming they had seen Xavier's car near her home. Some even reported seeing him stop in town on April 14. Although these accounts seemed unlikely, detectives noticed clear connections between Xavier and Colette. This led them to investigate the possibility that the two had escaped together. Consequently, Colette shifted from being seen as a victim to potentially being viewed as an accomplice in crimes that might have involved Xavier's family. However, friends and family of Colette quickly disputed this theory, asserting that she was not capable of cruelty. As detectives explored new leads that emerged almost daily, they became convinced that there was no romantic or conspiratorial link between Xavier and Colette. They began to feel that the similarities between Xavier and Colette were merely coincidental or tragic coincidences. To definitively eliminate this theory, they decided to examine both Xavier's and Colette's mobile phones. They encountered a challenge. Xavier's phone could not be tracked, and there were no calls or messages from Colette's phone to his. After their investigation, they found no evidence of any contact between the two after the sale of the house. Although the theory regarding Xavier was intriguing, it ultimately consumed valuable police time and resources. 3 weeks after Colette's disappearance, any possible link to Xavier was dismissed. Xavier himself was never found, leaving the French police at an impasse. The case has reached a dead end and will not make any progress until at least May 15, 2011. On this day, about 30 kilometers from Lorgues, 2 tourists were returning from a forest hike and taking photos. While using a remote path to capture some scenic shots, they were hit by a strong, unpleasant smell coming from the side of the path. One of the tourists decided to investigate the source of the odor. As the woman approached a pile of stones, the smell intensified and became unbearable. When she moved one of the stones, she discovered a leg protruding from beneath the rocks. The tourists quickly called the police. Within minutes, gendarmes arrived at the location and found the body of a woman in an advanced state of decomposition, making it difficult to determine her gender. Only her clothing provided a clue. The police attempted to identify the victim but were initially unsuccessful. They took photographs of her clothes, accessories, and jewelry, which were then shown to the families of various women who had gone missing in the area. Among those families were the children of Colette. Her daughter and son recognized their mother based on what she was wearing. Although the gendarmes believed they had identified Colette a month after her disappearance, they chose to wait for more conclusive evidence. DNA analysis was necessary to confirm family ties, as appearance alone could not provide definitive proof. Ultimately, the examination verified the police's suspicions. The body was indeed identified as Colette Durand. On May 17, 2011, an autopsy was conducted on the body that had been found at the Forensic Medical Institute. Unfortunately, the condition of the remains was so poor that the exact cause of death could not be determined. The forensic expert did confirm that Colette had not been abused before her death, but it did not help the police make much progress in the case. As a result, the investigation into her disappearance shifted focus to a murder investigation. On June 9, 2011, Colette's body was buried. Law enforcement officers attended the funeral, knowing that criminals sometimes show up at such events to witness the impact of their actions. Some may seek to relive their emotions, while others might derive satisfaction from seeing the grief of the victim's family. Several officers remained in vehicles, while others blended in with the attendees, discreetly observing the proceedings. During this time, the police noted that Sylvian, Colette's business partner and sister-in-law, was missing from the funeral. Although Sylvian and Colette were close, Sylvian's absence raised suspicions. This concern increased a few days later when Sylvian attempted to end her life. Although she survived with minor injuries and poisoning, her actions were alarming. When the police arrived after a call from Sylvian's neighbor, they found Sylvian lying on her couch at home. She was unable to fully express herself, so she was taken to a medical center for assistance. However, the officers did not leave empty-handed. They discovered a lengthy letter addressed to her son, David Perel, which was several pages long. While the letter did not contain explicit confessions regarding her actions concerning Colette, the detectives interpreted it as a potential admission of guilt prior to her death. The police decided to speak with David, and he provided new insights into the troubled relationship between Sylvian and Colette. He believed that shortly before Colette's death, she and Sylvian had experienced a serious conflict related to their shared business. Intrigued, the detectives asked David to recount his activities on April 14th. He described the daytime as uneventful, but his account of the evening was much more compelling. On April 14th, at around 10 p.m., Sylvian asked David to drive her to Colette's house to discuss some important business matters. Her own car was broken, so she turned to him for help. However, on their way, his car also broke down a few kilometers from home. Despite the rain, they decided to walk back instead. He took the car battery with them, and together they returned in an attempt to fix the car. On the night Colette disappeared, this mother and son spent hours in the rain attempting to repair a car left outside the city. The gendarmes suspected that David was trying to create a questionable alibi to explain his absence from home. This suspicion was further fueled by Sylvian's initial statement to the detectives, in which she claimed she had spent the previous days at home. It seemed implausible that she could forget such a significant event. When Sylvian regained consciousness in the medical center, her account of the events changed. Her new story mirrored what her son had previously told, including all the important details. The gendarmes decided to investigate her claims. They found that on the night of April 14th to 15th, there was no rain in the area. Additionally, it was odd that Sylvian and her son were unable to flag down a passing car for a ride home. Why did they walk so far while carrying a battery with them? The road's vehicle monitoring system revealed that approximately 5 cars passed by during the time they were walking home. It seemed unlikely that none of these drivers would have stopped to assist them in the rain. This raised suspicions that David and Sylvian were hiding something and might be involved in the death of Colette. Unfortunately, there was no physical evidence to support these suspicions. As a result, the decision was made to keep a close watch on them over the next few months. Their phone calls were monitored, and on February 8, 2012, this surveillance yielded important information. The police intercepted a conversation between Sylvian and Bernard, who was Colette's neighbor. It became clear that Bernard knew much more than he had initially revealed. On April 14th, he not only heard sounds coming from above but also saw Sylvian's car arrive at the house, indicating he was aware of her actions. David, Sylvian's son, was also involved, as he was driving for his mother. On February 20th, 2012, David and Sylvian were arrested. Detectives viewed David as the weak link. During questioning, he quickly confessed, seeming relieved to unburden himself of his guilt. He revealed that on April 14th, they arrived at Colette's home around 3:30 p.m. Afterward, Sylvian lured her into a barn behind the house. A business dispute led to further conflict, during which Sylvian attacked Colette, beating her to the ground. Then, she took a rope from the barn and began to strangle Colette in front of David. Although he did not intervene or participate in the attack, he admitted to helping move the body afterward. They left Colette's body on the property, covering it with a tarpaulin. In the evening, when they fabricated the story about the broken car, they took the body out of town. David assisted Sylvian in dragging the deceased away from the road and covering her with stones. Despite David's confession, Sylvian denied any wrongdoing. She claimed that death was accidental and that they hid the body out of fear of the police. However, it was puzzling how well prepared she seemed for the crime, as she had latex gloves that prevented her from leaving fingerprints. After being detained for 48 hours, Sylvian was charged with murder, while David was released. Though he was viewed as an accomplice, his testimony needed verification, so he remained under judicial supervision. The next step was to determine the motive. It turned out that the motive was linked to financial issues. Sylvian's business was on the brink of failure when Colette uncovered that Sylvian was embezzling money from clients. Another possible motive was jealousy, as Colette was thriving while Sylvian's problems continued to grow. Shortly before the tragedy, Sylvian had gone through a painful divorce, and one of her 2 sons had been convicted of violence. Communication between her and David had nearly ceased, and his involvement in the crime marked the end of their close relationship. On January 21, 2014, David was charged in court with the murder of Colette. He claimed that he was only an accomplice and that he helped hide the body due to pressure from his mother. Sylvian, his mother, argued that the incident was an act of involuntary manslaughter. She explained that she had lost her temper after a conflict with her business partner, Colette, who was trying to take everything from her. Facing life in prison, Sylvian sought to downplay her guilt. The prosecutor's office looked into the role of the tenant, Bernard. Although he witnessed the conflict between Sylvian and Colette, he did not report it because he feared Sylvian. Ultimately, he testified as a witness for the prosecution. On January 23, 2014, the jury found Sylvian Fabre guilty of manslaughter, sentencing her to 30 years in prison. Bernard was acquitted, and David Perel received a 3-year suspended sentence. Over the years, Colette's children struggled to understand what had happened in that barn with their mother. Despite the complicated trial, they felt uncertain that the entire truth had been uncovered. They were unhappy with the court's verdict, believing that Sylvian had committed premeditated murder but had received a lenient sentence. Additionally, they felt Bernard was more involved than he had admitted and had evaded responsibility for the crime. The case of Colette Durand is a tragic and mysterious story that leaves many unanswered questions for her family and the community. Colette, a devoted mother, suddenly disappeared, leading to a lengthy investigation filled with suspicions of love, money, and betrayal. Ultimately, the truth was revealed through David's confession and Sylvian's sentencing, but was justice truly served? Bernard, the neighbor with a murky past, remains a significant question mark as he evades all charges. For Colette's children, the pain lies not only in losing their mother but also in the feeling that the secrets surrounding their mother's death may be buried forever.